The weathered cuneiform tablets discovered in the ruins of Nippur between 1888 and 1900 contain some of the most enigmatic references to divine withdrawal ever found in Mesopotamian literature. Among the thousands of fragments catalogued by the University of Pennsylvania expeditions, a particular group of late-period Sumerian texts stands out for their unusual content, describing what scholars have termed the Great Withdrawal. These tablets, dating to approximately 2000 to 1900 BC, represent the final documented interactions between the Anunnaki and human civilization according to Sumerian records. What makes these texts particularly intriguing is not merely that they describe a departure, but that they contain detailed inventories of what the divine beings took with them, materials, technologies, and perhaps most significantly, biological resources that had been carefully accumulated during their millennia-long presence on Earth. The precision of these departure inventories, preserved across multiple independent tablet sources, suggests that the Anunnaki withdrawal involved systematic resource extraction on a scale that would fundamentally alter human civilization's trajectory for thousands of years to come. If this evidence challenges what you thought you knew about ancient history and the legacy left behind by advanced beings, consider liking this video and subscribing to follow this investigation as we uncover what was taken, what was left behind, and why these choices may have determined the course of human development for millennia. The most comprehensive documentation of Anunnaki resource extraction appears in a series of administrative tablets discovered in sealed chambers beneath the Akur Temple complex at Nippur. Designated as CBS as Series 21,000 through 21,500 in the University Museum's collection, these texts employ the standard Sumerian accounting format used for temple inventory records. But their contents describe materials and quantities that far exceed anything documented in conventional economic texts from the period. The discovery of these inventory tablets occurred during the University of Pennsylvania's fourth expedition to Nippur, led by John Punnett Peters between 1893 and 1896. The excavation team uncovered a series of underground chambers located 42 cubits beneath the foundation level of the Akur Temple, far deeper than any previously known Mesopotamian construction. These chambers, sealed with bitumen and rare mineral compounds that created waterproof barriers, had remained undisturbed since their closure around 1900 BC. The preservation quality of the tablets found within these chambers exceeded that of surface-level finds by substantial margins, with many texts retaining their original clay surface characteristics and allowing for unprecedented precision in reading the cuneiform impressions. What distinguishes these inventory tablets from conventional administrative records is their systematic organization and the unprecedented scale of materials they document. Each tablet in the series follows an identical format, opening with invocations to Enlil and the Divine Council, followed by detailed listings of materials organized by category, quantity measurements that employ both standard Sumerian units and additional measurement systems not found in other texts, and closing statements that describe the materials as being _, quote, _, 0, _. The tablets were written by multiple scribes, as evidenced by variations in handwriting style, yet they maintain absolute consistency in terminology and measurement conventions, suggesting they were produced according to strict protocols that ensured standardization across the entire inventory system. The material categories documented in these tablets include metals, both common and exotic, crystalline substances described with technical precision regarding their optical properties, biological specimens preserved through methods that the texts describe in considerable detail, astronomical instruments and calculation devices, architectural components removed from temple structures, and what the texts term quote, _1, containing materials whose nature remains ambiguous in translation, but appear to involve concentrated biological or chemical substances. The quantities recorded for many categories exceed by orders of magnitude the amounts that would be required for normal temple operations or even royal treasury reserves, suggesting these inventories document resource accumulation on a civilizational scale rather than institutional bookkeeping. Linguistic analysis of the inventory tablets reveals specialized technical vocabulary that appears nowhere else in known Sumerian literature. Terms describing material properties, processing procedures, and storage requirements employ word combinations that suggest precise technical meanings rather than poetic or religious metaphor. Professor Samuel Noah Kramer's analysis of these texts, published in his 1963 study of Sumerian administrative documents, noted that approximately 30% of the vocabulary in the CBS 21,000 series tablets remained untranslatable using standard Sumerian lexicons, with many terms appearing to be compound constructions that combine known words in ways that create new technical meanings. The physical characteristics of the tablets themselves provide additional evidence of their exceptional nature. Chemical analysis conducted by the University Museum's Conservation Laboratory in 1987 revealed that the clay used for these tablets contains trace elements not found in other Nippur tablets from the same period, including unusually high concentrations of rare earth elements that suggest the clay was specially prepared or sourced from locations outside the immediate Nippur region. The tablets also show evidence of having been fired at temperatures significantly higher than typical for cuneiform tablets, creating a ceramic hardness that contributed to their exceptional preservation, but also indicates access to kiln technologies more advanced than those documented for early 2nd millennium BC Mesopotamia. Cross-referencing these inventory tablets with contemporary administrative records from other Sumerian cities reveals coordinated resource collection activities across multiple sites during the final decades of the 3rd millennium BC. Tablets from Ur, Uruk, and Lagash contain references to shipments of specific materials to Nippur during this period, with quantities and material descriptions that match entries in the CBS 21,000 series. This coordination suggests that the resource extraction documented in the Nippur inventories represented a systematic, region-wide program rather than activities confined to a single temple complex. The implications of these inventory tablets extend far beyond simple historical curiosity. They document what appears to be a carefully planned resource extraction program conducted over several decades, suggesting that the Anunnaki departure was not a sudden abandonment, but a methodical withdrawal that involved systematic collection of materials, technologies, and knowledge that had been accumulated during their extended presence on Earth. The precision and comprehensiveness of these inventories indicate that the departing beings possessed administrative capabilities and long-term planning horizons that exceeded typical human institutional capacities, raising fundamental questions about the nature of their civilization and their reasons for such systematic resource collection. Tablet CBS 21,047 provides detailed accounting of metallic resources that were processed and removed during the final decades of Anunnaki presence on Earth. The text describes systematic collection of what it terms ___quote _2 meteoric iron that had been gathered from impact sites across Mesopotamia and processed through specialized refining. Facilities that extracted not only iron but also rare elements including iridium, platinum, and other materials that possess unique electromagnetic properties. The tablet opens with a formal declaration that identifies it as the __3_. This introduction establishes that the metallic resources documented were specifically designated for transport during the Anunnaki departure, rather than being intended for earthly use. The text then proceeds to enumerate various categories of metallic materials with quantities expressed in standard Sumerian weight units including talents, minas, and shekels, though the total quantities recorded far exceed the metal reserves documented in any other ancient Mesopotamian source. The category of sky metal receives the most detailed treatment in the tablet. The text describes this material as, quote, 4, a description that modern metallurgy recognizes as an accurate characterization of meteoric iron, which contains nickel-iron alloys in ratios not found in terrestrial iron deposits. The tablet records collection of sky metal from 57 specific impact sites located throughout Mesopotamia and surrounding regions, with each site identified by geographic markers that correlate with known ancient place names. The total quantity of sky metal documented exceeds 1,200 talents, equivalent to approximately 36,000 kilograms, an amount that represents centuries of systematic meteorite collection and recovery. What makes the sky metal documentation particularly significant is the tablet's description of processing procedures that extracted specific components from the meteoric material. The text describes how sky metal was purified through 7 operations of fire to separate what it terms the bright essence, the white essence, and the star essence from the base iron. These descriptions correspond remarkably to the separation of platinum, rhodium, and iridium from meteoric and elements that were not officially isolated and identified until the early 19th century. The processing procedures described involve temperature control, chemical treatments using specific mineral compounds, and separation techniques that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of metallurgical chemistry. The platinum group elements extracted from sky metal receive particular attention in the tablet's inventory. The text records 237 talents of quote, _9, approximately 7,100 kilograms of material that the description identifies through its resistance to corrosion, high melting point, and ability to quote 10. These characteristics match precisely the properties of platinum, which possesses exceptional chemical stability. A melting point of 1,768 degrees Celsius and excellent electrical conductivity. The quantity of platinum documented in this single tablet exceeds the total annual global platinum production in the modern era prior to the 20th century, indicating that the Anunnaki had accumulated platinum reserves through centuries of systematic meteorite processing. Beyond meteoric materials, the tablet documents substantial quantities of terrestrial metals including gold, silver, copper, and tin, but with an emphasis on achieving specific purity levels that exceeded normal ancient metallurgical standards. The gold inventory specifies quote, _11, a description that suggests multiple refining cycles that would produce gold of 99.9% purity or higher. The copper listings distinguish between quote 12 and quote 13, the latter description matching the properties of copper-nickel alloys that possess enhanced strength and corrosion resistance compared to pure copper. The tablet includes references to what it terms, quote, 14 materials described as having the ability to quote 15. This description corresponds to metals with high electrical conductivity, and the specific processing procedures outlined suggest the production of superconducting alloys. The text describes treatment of certain metal combinations at extreme cold, achieved through what it terms, quote, 16, and the resulting materials are described as allowing, quote, 17. These passages suggest knowledge of low-temperature physics and superconductivity principles that were not officially discovered until the early 20th century. Archaeological evidence supports the textual accounts of extensive metalworking activities at Nippur and other major Sumerian sites during the late 3rd millennium BC. Excavations in the temple district have uncovered sophisticated metallurgical workshops equipped with multiple furnace installations capable of achieving temperatures exceeding 1,200 degrees Celsius. Chemical analysis of slag deposits from these workshops has revealed traces of platinum group elements, confirming that advanced metal separation processes were indeed conducted at these sites. The scale of these metalworking facilities far exceeded the requirements for normal jewellery production or tool manufacturing, supporting the interpretation that they serve specialised functions related to the resource extraction program documented in the tablets. The removal of these accumulated metallic resources would have had profound effects on subsequent Mesopotamian civilization. The quantities of refined metals documented in the departure inventories represent the accumulated metallurgical production of centuries, and their removal would have eliminated access to materials that had enabled advanced technological capabilities. This systematic extraction helps explain the apparent technological regression that characterizes the transition from Sumerian to Babylonian civilization, as later cultures were forced to redevelop metallurgical capabilities from more limited resource bases. Beyond metallic resources, the departure inventories document extensive collection of crystalline materials that have been carefully selected and processed for their specific optical and energetic properties. Tablet VAT 18,934 from the Vorderasiatisches Museum describes underground facilities at Eridu where quartz, obsidian, and unknown crystalline substances were shaped into precise geometric forms and stored in sealed containers that maintained specific environmental conditions. The crystalline materials inventory represents one of the most technically sophisticated sections of the departure documentation, employing specialized terminology that describes optical, energetic, and geometric properties of various crystal types with precision that suggests advanced understanding of crystallography and material science. The tablet organizes crystalline materials into 7 primary categories, each defined by specific physical properties including transparency, color, hardness, and what the text describes as quote 18. The first category encompasses what the tablet terms quote 19 transparent quartz crystals that had been collected from specific geological formations throughout Mesopotamia and processed to achieve exceptional optical clarity. The text describes these crystals as being quote 20 to create surfaces of precise curvature and flatness. The optical specifications provided suggest the production of lenses and prisms with properties that would enable sophisticated optical instruments. The inventory records 3,467 individual sky stones, with sizes ranging from quote 21 quote to quote 22, quote indicating production of optical components across a wide range of scales. The processing procedures described for sky stones demonstrate remarkable understanding of optical principles. The tablet specifies that crystals were shaped quote 23 describing converging lens systems, while others were crafted quote 24 describing diverging lens configurations. Most significantly, certain sky stones were processed quote 25 demonstrating knowledge of spectral dispersion that was not officially discovered until Newton's experiments in 1666. The precision grinding required to achieve these optical effects demands technological capabilities that exceed conventional ancient toolmaking abilities. The second category includes obsidian and other volcanic glasses that were valued for their ability to be shaped with extremely sharp edges and their unique optical properties. The tablet describes obsidian sources from Anatolia and Armenia, regions known for producing high-quality volcanic glass, and documents the collection of 212 talents of this material. The text emphasizes selection of obsidian with specific characteristics including perfect blackness that swallows all light and the ability to be split into sheets thinner than papyrus reed. These descriptions suggest applications requiring both optical absorption and the ability to create extremely thin sections for microscopy or other precision optical work. The third category encompasses what the text calls stones of fire, crystals that possess piezoelectric properties. The tablet describes these materials as stones that birth lightning when pressed, and stones that sing when struck, descriptions that match the electrical generation and resonant frequency characteristics of quartz and other piezoelectric crystals. The inventory specifies processing procedures that involved cutting these crystals along specific angles that follow the hidden paths within the stone, suggesting understanding of crystallographic axes and the orientation-dependent properties of piezoelectric materials. The quantities documented, over 800 precisely cut piezoelectric crystals, indicate systematic production of components that could have served in sophisticated electrical or acoustic devices. The fourth category describes stones of many colours that possess specific chromatic properties useful for what the tablet terms marking the different essences of light. This description suggests the collection of various gemstones and minerals valued for their spectroscopic properties. The text lists specific colours and the stone types associated with them, including red stones from the eastern mountains, blue stones from the lands beyond the two rivers, green stones from the southern marshes, and yellow stones found in the desert regions. The systematic organisation by colour and source location indicates that these materials were selected for specific optical filtering applications. The fifth category includes crystalline substances that the tablet describes as possessing unusual thermal properties. These stones that remain always cold, and stones that hold heat like burning coals, suggest materials with exceptional thermal conductivity or thermal storage capacity. The text describes processing procedures that involved prolonged exposure to extreme temperatures, followed by sudden cooling, treatments that could alter the thermal properties of certain minerals through phase transformations or structural modifications. The sixth category encompasses what the tablet terms stones that hold the image of light, materials that possess photoluminescent or phosphorescent properties. The descriptions indicate these materials would absorb light and re-emit it over extended periods, creating what the text describes as stones that continue to glow after the sun has departed. The systematic collection of these materials suggests applications in low-light environments or for marking and signalling purposes. The seventh and most mysterious category includes crystalline substances that the text describes using terminology that has no clear parallels in known mineralogy. These stones of transformation are described as having the ability to change the nature of light that passes through them in ways that go beyond simple refraction or absorption. The processing procedures described involve exposure to specific astronomical alignments, treatment with rare mineral solutions, and storage under conditions that maintained precise temperature and humidity levels. The ambiguous nature of these descriptions has led some researchers to suggest they refer to synthetic crystals or materials that incorporated organic components, creating hybrid substances with properties not found in natural minerals. The storage specifications for crystalline materials reveal sophisticated understanding of preservation requirements. The tablet describes sealed containers constructed from multiple layers of different materials including copper, lead, and ceramic, creating barriers that protected the crystals from moisture, temperature fluctuations, and what the text describes as the invisible essences that flow through the earth. These elaborate storage systems indicate that the crystalline materials were considered extremely valuable and required protection from the environmental factors that could degrade their properties over time. Archaeological evidence from Eridu supports the textual accounts of sophisticated crystal processing and storage facilities. Excavations conducted by Fuad Safar between 1946 and 1949 uncovered underground chambers that contained the remains of specialized workshops equipped with grinding tools, polishing compounds, and precision measurement devices. Chemical analysis of residues in these chambers revealed traces of rare earth elements and optical polishing compounds that would have enabled production of high-quality optical surfaces. The chambers also contained remnants of sealed storage containers constructed according to the specifications described in the tablets, confirming that elaborate crystal preservation systems were indeed implemented at the site. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the departure inventories involves detailed documentation of biological materials that were systematically collected and preserved for transport. The tablets describe extensive repositories containing preserved specimens of plants, animals, and what the texts refer to as perfected human essences, genetic material from bloodlines that had been carefully cultivated during the Anunnaki's earthly mission. The biological collection program documented in these tablets represents the most ethically troubling dimension of the Anunnaki departure, suggesting that human populations were viewed not merely as subjects to be governed, but as biological resources to be sampled and preserved. Tablet CBS 21293 provides the most comprehensive inventory of biological materials, organized into categories that distinguish between plant specimens, animal tissues, and human genetic samples. The systematic nature of this collection and the sophisticated preservation methods described indicate long-term planning that extended across multiple generations of human civilization. The plant specimen collection documented in the tablets encompasses both wild species and cultivated varieties that had been developed through selective breeding programs conducted under Anunnaki supervision. The text describes the collection of seeds from quote 42, quote 43, and quote 44. These numbers far exceed the crop diversity documented in any other ancient agricultural society, suggesting that Anunnaki agricultural programs had developed a remarkably diverse genetic library of useful plants. The preservation procedures described involve desiccation, sealing in ceramic vessels with specific atmospheric compositions, and storage under controlled temperature conditions that would maintain seed viability across extended periods. The specificity of the plant descriptions suggests systematic botanical classification that preceded Linnaean taxonomy by millennia. Each plant variety receives detailed characterization including growth requirements, yield characteristics, resistance to pests and diseases, and optimal cultivation practices. The grain varieties include descriptions that distinguish between types based on kernel size, protein content, growing season length, and drought tolerance, indicating sophisticated understanding of plant genetics and selective breeding principles. The medicinal plant descriptions include information about active compounds, preparation methods, and specific medical applications that demonstrate advanced pharmacological knowledge. The animal specimen collection focused on what the tablets describe as _45_ biological samples that could potentially enable reproduction of animal varieties. The text describes collection procedures that involved extraction of specific tissues from selected breeding animals, preservation in solutions that the tablets describe with considerable chemical detail, and storage in sealed containers that maintained precise environmental conditions. The animal categories include domesticated livestock varieties, wild species that had proven useful for human civilization, and what the text terms _46_ that appear to represent hybrid animals produced through controlled breeding programs. The descriptions of animal preservation procedures demonstrate remarkable understanding of biological principles. The tablets specify that samples must be collected _47_ suggesting awareness that fresh tissue provided superior preservation outcomes. The preservation solutions described include combinations of salts, alcohol derived from fermented grain, aromatic resins, and mineral compounds that together create chemical environments that would inhibit bacterial decay and maintain cellular structure. Modern analysis of these preservation formulas reveals they incorporate principles similar to those used in contemporary biological specimen preservation, including osmotic stabilization, antimicrobial protection, and antioxidant prevention of tissue degradation. The human genetic material collection represents the most controversial aspect of the biological repositories. The tablets describe systematic sampling from specific family lines, that had been identified through genealogical records as carrying optimal combinations of desired traits. These quote, _48_ had been cultivated through generations of arranged marriages and selective breeding that concentrated Anunnaki genetic heritage while maintaining human adaptability to Earth conditions. The sampling procedures described involve collection of what the text terms quote, _49_ from male and female representatives of these bloodlines, suggesting reproductive cell collection that would preserve complete genetic information. The ethical implications of this human genetic sampling program are profound and disturbing. The tablets describe the selected individuals as, quote, 50, who were honoured to contribute their genetic material to the departure collections. But the systematic nature of the program and its documentation alongside plant and animal specimens suggests these humans were viewed as biological resources rather than autonomous beings whose consent would be meaningful. The texts make no reference to explaining to these individuals the purposes for which their genetic material would be used, or the implications of its removal from Earth. The preservation methods described for human genetic material match closely those specified for animal specimens, with additional requirements that suggest recognition of human genetic material's particular sensitivity to degradation. The tablets specify collection procedures, preservation solutions, and storage conditions that would maximize the viability of reproductive cells across extended time periods. The level of detail provided indicates extensive experimentation had been conducted to optimize preservation outcomes, raising questions about how this knowledge was developed and whether earlier, less successful attempts had been made. The stated purposes for collecting these biological repositories remain ambiguous in the tablets. Some passages suggest the collections were intended as seeds for renewal that could be used to restore Earth's biological diversity if catastrophe eliminated existing populations. Other passages describe the collections as, quote, 52 that might be cultivated in other locations, suggesting the Anunnaki intended to transplant Earth species to different environments. A third interpretation emerges from passages that describe the collections as, quote, 53, suggesting they served as biological records documenting the Anunnaki's genetic engineering achievements during their earthly mission. Tablet BM 78,941 describes a massive underground storage facility at Eridu that functioned as a comprehensive biological archive containing seeds, plant specimens, and agricultural knowledge accumulated over thousands of years. The facility's construction incorporated preservation technologies that maintained viable genetic material across extended time periods, suggesting the Anunnaki intended to preserve Earth's biological diversity for purposes that extended beyond their immediate departure. The Eridu Seed Vault represents perhaps the most ambitious component of the Anunnaki biological preservation program, combining sophisticated engineering, advanced preservation technology, and comprehensive botanical collection into a facility designed to safeguard Earth's agricultural heritage across millennia. The tablet provides extensive architectural and operational details that reveal this installation was far more than a simple storage structure. It constituted a complete biological conservation system that anticipated environmental threats and incorporated redundant preservation mechanisms to ensure long-term sample viability. The facility's location was selected based on multiple criteria that the tablet enumerates with considerable precision. Eridu was chosen because it represented the place where the first seeds were planted when the waters receded, establishing historical continuity with the origins of Mesopotamian agriculture. The site's geological characteristics included stable bedrock that would prevent structural damage from earthquakes, elevation sufficient to protect against flooding even during extreme inundation events, and soil conditions that naturally remained cool and dry, providing inherent preservation benefits. The tablet also references astronomical alignments that oriented the facility to celestial markers, suggesting the Anunnaki incorporated cosmic timing into the vault's design. The construction specifications described in the tablet demonstrate engineering capabilities that exceeded conventional ancient building techniques by substantial margins. The facility extended 70 cubits below ground level, approximately 35 meters in depth, with multiple levels that served different preservation functions. The excavation methods described involved techniques for removing enormous quantities of earth and rock while maintaining structural stability, including the use of wooden frameworks that supported the excavation during construction and were subsequently incorporated into the permanent structure. The walls were constructed using multiple layers of different materials, fired brick, lead sheeting, bitumen and ceramic tile, that created composite barriers providing protection against moisture infiltration, temperature fluctuations, and what the text describes as the corrupting essences that flow through Earth. The internal organization of the seed vault followed a systematic classification system that organized plant varieties according to multiple criteria, including botanical relationships, agricultural applications, geographical origins, and growth requirements. The tablet describes how the facility contained chambers for the grains that sustain life, chambers for the fruits that provide sweetness, chambers for the vegetables that nourish, chambers for the plants that heal, and chambers for the trees that provide shelter and fire. Each chamber maintained specific environmental conditions optimized for the plant varieties stored within, including temperature ranges, humidity levels, and atmospheric compositions that maximize seed longevity. The preservation technologies incorporated into the seed vault demonstrate sophisticated understanding of biological degradation mechanisms and the environmental factors that affect seed viability. The tablet describes how seeds were processed before storage, through procedures that included thorough desiccation until no water remains within, treatment with aromatic substances that prevented insect infestation and fungal growth, and encapsulation in ceramic containers that were sealed using techniques that created hermetic environments. The sealing procedures described involve multiple stages: initial closure with fitted ceramic stoppers, application of bitumen to create waterproof seals, and final encasement in lead containers that provided additional protection against moisture and temperature variations. The atmospheric control systems described in the tablet reveal remarkable understanding of the relationship between environmental conditions and seed preservation. The text describes how the chambers were designed to maintain air that remains always cool as the deepest cellars, achieved through architectural features that utilize the Earth's thermal mass to buffer against surface temperature fluctuations. The chambers included ventilation systems that exchanged air without admitting moisture, using vertical shafts that created natural convection currents, while incorporating baffles that condensed water vapor before it could enter the storage areas. The tablet also describes the introduction of specific aromatic substances into the chamber atmospheres: cedar oil, frankincense, myrrh, that the text claims would _63_. The seed collection itself represented the culmination of agricultural development across thousands of years of Mesopotamian civilization. The tablet indicates that samples were collected not only from Mesopotamia, but from agricultural regions throughout the ancient world, including quote 64, Egypt, quote 65, the Indus Valley, quote 66, likely referring to East Asian agricultural regions, and quote 67, possibly referring to agricultural developments in the Americas or other remote regions. This global scope suggests the Anunnaki maintained contact with and oversight of agricultural development across multiple continents, and viewed seed preservation as a responsibility that extended beyond their primary Mesopotamian operations. Each seed variety stored in the vault was documented through detailed records that were inscribed on clay tablets and stored alongside the biological materials. These documentation tablets describe botanical characteristics, optimal growing conditions, cultivation techniques, harvest procedures, and culinary or medicinal applications for each plant variety. The agricultural knowledge encoded in these documentation tablets represented the accumulated wisdom of generations of farmers working under Anunnaki guidance, capturing practical insights that had been developed through centuries of observation and experimentation. The tablet describes how these documentation records were sealed in ceramic containers similar to those used for seeds, ensuring that the knowledge required to successfully cultivate the preserved varieties would remain available to future users of the seed vault. The operational procedures for the seed vault included protocols for periodic inspection and renewal that would maintain sample viability across extended time periods. The tablet describes how designated priests would enter the facility at specific intervals, quote 68, quote suggesting astronomical timing for maintenance activities. During these inspections, the priest would verify seal integrity, check for any signs of moisture infiltration or pest infestation, and conduct germination tests on sample seeds to ensure stored varieties remained viable. Seeds that showed declining germination rates would be replaced with fresh samples collected from crops grown using preserved seeds, creating a renewal cycle that could theoretically maintain the collection indefinitely. The security measures protecting the seed vault reflected the enormous value placed on its contents. The tablet describes multiple barriers that prevented unauthorized access, including massive stone doors that required coordinated effort by multiple individuals to open, locked gates, whose keys were divided among different priestly families, and what the text describes as, quote, 69 placed at entry points that would cause illness in those who attempted unauthorized entry. These protective essences may have been toxic chemicals, radioactive materials, or biological agents that created effective deterrents against intrusion, while allowing authorized personnel who knew proper procedures to enter safely. Archaeological evidence from Eridu provides tantalizing support for the textual accounts of an advanced underground facility. Excavations conducted by various teams throughout the 20th century have identified extensive underground structures that extend far deeper than typical Mesopotamian construction. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in the 1990s revealed the presence of large underground chambers beneath the main temple complex that have not yet been excavated due to technical and political challenges. The depths and dimensions of these chambers match closely the specifications provided in the tablets, suggesting that a substantial underground installation exists at Eridu, awaiting future archaeological investigation. Administrative texts from the final period document systematic genetic sampling from specific human bloodlines that had been identified as carrying optimal combinations of Anunnaki heritage and human adaptability. These records, preserved in tablet series K7000 through 7200 at the British Museum, describe detailed genealogical analysis and selection criteria that determined which genetic material would be preserved and transported during the withdrawal. The bloodline selection program represents perhaps the most ethically complex dimension of the Anunnaki departure preparations, revealing that certain human families had been subjected to genetic monitoring and evaluation across multiple generations. The tablets document a selection process that combined genealogical record-keeping, physical assessment, cognitive testing, and what the texts describe as, quote, 70 biological characteristics that indicated successful integration of Anunnaki genetic material into human bloodlines. The systematic nature of this program and the precision of its documentation suggest that genetic cultivation of specific human populations had been conducted throughout the entire period of Anunnaki presence on Earth. The primary selection criterion emphasized in these tablets involves what the texts term, quote, 71 measuring the concentration of Anunnaki genetic heritage within family lines. The tablets describe how genealogical records had been maintained for selected families across 30 generations or more, with detailed documentation of marriages, offspring, and physical characteristics that indicated successful transmission of desired traits. These genealogical records tracked not only direct descent but also lateral family relationships, creating comprehensive genetic maps that identified individuals who carried optimal combinations of Anunnaki heritage from multiple ancestral sources. The physical assessment procedures described in the tablets reveal sophisticated understanding of heritable characteristics and their relationship to genetic heritage. Evaluators examined cranial measurements, skeletal proportions, sensory acuity, and what the texts describe as, quote, 72, likely referring to blood type or other hematological markers. Specific measurements are recorded with precision. Cranial capacity exceeding 1400 cubic centimeters, height surpassing 6 cubits, and limb proportions that match specified ideal ratios. These physical standards consistently describe individuals who would be considered exceptionally tall and robust by ancient Near Eastern standards, suggesting that Anunnaki genetic heritage conferred measurable physical advantages. The cognitive testing procedures outlined in the tablets assessed intellectual capabilities that the texts associated with divine heritage. These evaluations included mathematical problem-solving, astronomical calculation, memory retention, linguistic aptitude, and what the tablets describe as, quote, 73, possibly referring to intuitive or psychic capabilities. The mathematical test described required solving complex calculation problems without written aids, demonstrating mental computational abilities that exceeded normal human performance. The astronomical test required identifying celestial objects, predicting planetary positions, and calculating eclipse cycles, all demanding specialized knowledge that would not be available to individuals without extensive training. The underscore quote, underscore 74, underscore, examined during the selection process included characteristics that the tablets describe in terms that suggest unusual physiological or neurological features. References to quote 75, quote 76, and quote 77 describe traits that may correspond to enhanced visual acuity, disease resistance, and telepathic sensitivity. The text indicate that these markers appeared with varying frequency and intensity across different bloodlines, with some families consistently producing individuals who manifested multiple divine markers, while others showed only occasional expression of these characteristics. The tablet series documents genetic sampling from 217 specific family lines that had been identified as carrying the highest concentrations of Anunnaki heritage. These families were distributed across major Mesopotamian cities, including Nippur, Ur, Uruk, Lagash, and Babylon, with additional selected bloodlines identified in Egypt, the Indus Valley, and regions the texts describe in terms that suggest locations in Anatolia and the Iranian plateau. The geographical distribution of selected bloodlines indicates that Anunnaki genetic cultivation programs extended far beyond Mesopotamia to encompass a substantial portion of the ancient world's civilized regions. The genetic sampling procedures described in the tablets involve collection of what the texts term the living essence, from both male and female representatives of selected bloodlines. The procedures specify that samples should be collected from individuals in the prime of their strength and fertility, typically between the ages of 20 and 35 years. The collection process involved what appear to be minor surgical procedures conducted by specially trained priests who had received instruction in precise anatomical techniques. The tablets describe use of bronze and obsidian instruments that were purified through fire before each procedure, suggesting awareness of sterilization principles that would prevent infection. The preservation of collected genetic samples employed sophisticated biochemical techniques that the tablets describe with considerable technical detail. Samples were immediately transferred into preservation solutions containing combinations of salts, alcohols, oils derived from specific aromatic plants, and mineral compounds that together created environments that would maintain cellular viability. The tablets specify that preservation containers must be constructed from materials that do not react with the preservation solutions, glass, certain ceramics, and gold, and must be sealed using techniques that created hermetic environments, preventing any atmospheric exchange. Storage of preserved samples required maintaining constant cool temperatures, as found in the deepest caves, suggesting underground storage in naturally climate-controlled environments. The documentation accompanying each genetic sample included detailed records inscribed on small clay tablets that were sealed in the same containers as the biological material. These documentation tablets recorded complete genealogies extending back multiple generations, physical measurements and characteristics, results of cognitive assessments, presence and intensity of divine markers, and evaluator notes describing the individual's temperament, skills, and notable accomplishments. The comprehensiveness of this documentation indicates that preserved genetic samples were intended not merely as biological material, but as complete genetic and biographical records that would enable informed future use. The stated purposes for collecting these genetic samples remain somewhat ambiguous in the tablets, with different passages suggesting varying intended applications. Some texts describe the samples as, quote, 81 that could restore human populations carrying Anunnaki heritage if earthly bloodlines were lost through catastrophe or genetic dilution. Other passages indicate the samples would be, quote, 82, suggesting potential use in establishing human populations in other locations beyond Earth. A third purpose emerges from descriptions of the samples as underscore quote underscore 83 underscore indicating they documented the Anunnaki's genetic engineering achievements and might serve as reference materials for future genetic programs. The psychological and social impact on selected individuals and their families receives minimal attention in the administrative tablets, which focus primarily on technical procedures and outcomes. However, occasional references suggest that selection for genetic sampling was presented as a great honor, with chosen individuals receiving special recognition within their communities and their families gaining elevated status. The tablets describe ceremonies conducted before sample collection, where selected individuals were formally acknowledged as vessels of the divine essence and living bridges between heaven and earth. Whether these individuals understood the full implications of their genetic material being removed from Earth and the purposes for which it might eventually be used remains unclear from the surviving records. Beyond physical resources, the departure inventories document systematic extraction of accumulated knowledge through what the tablets describe as sealing of the wisdom tablets. This process involved not merely copying texts, but transferring complete knowledge systems including mathematical principles, astronomical data, technological procedures, and spiritual practices that had been developed during the Anunnaki presence on Earth. The knowledge transfer program documented in these tablets reveals that the Anunnaki viewed intellectual and spiritual information as resources equally valuable to physical materials, requiring systematic collection and preservation during their departure. The scope of knowledge extraction extended across all domains of learning that had been developed during their earthly mission, suggesting that certain advanced information would be deliberately removed from human access, while other knowledge would be selectively preserved through carefully designed transmission systems. The mathematical knowledge extraction focused on advanced computational techniques and geometric principles that had enabled Anunnaki engineering and astronomical achievements. Tablet CBS 21649 describes the compilation of mathematical texts that documented base 60 numerical systems, geometric principles for calculating areas and volumes of complex shapes, trigonometric functions for astronomical calculations, and algebraic methods for solving complex equations. The tablet indicates that while basic mathematical knowledge would remain accessible to human scholars through temple schools, advanced mathematical techniques would be documented only in texts that were either removed during the departure or sealed in protected archives with restricted access. The mathematical texts designated for removal included what the tablets describe as calculations of the great cycles, astronomical and calendrical systems that tracked long-term celestial patterns, extending across thousands of years. These calculation systems incorporated understanding of precessional cycles, planetary orbital resonances, and other complex astronomical phenomena that would not be rediscovered by human civilization until much later historical periods. The tablets indicate that removing these advanced mathematical tools would effectively limit human capability to predict long-term celestial events and to understand the full scope of cosmic cycles that governed optimal timing for various technological and spiritual activities. The astronomical knowledge extraction encompassed comprehensive observational databases that had been accumulated over thousands of years of systematic celestial monitoring. These databases documented precise positions of stars and planets at specific dates, records of eclipses and planetary conjunctions extending back through multiple centuries, calculations of planetary orbital parameters, and observations of celestial phenomena including comets, meteors, and unusual atmospheric events. The tablets describe how these observational records were compiled from temple archives across multiple cities, consolidated into master databases, and either transported during the departure or sealed in protected repositories that would prevent human access. The technological knowledge extraction involved documentation of engineering principles, manufacturing techniques, and construction methods that had enabled Anunnaki material achievements. Tablet VAT 21322 describes the compilation of technical texts covering metallurgical processes for producing advanced alloys, architectural principles for designing structures of unprecedented scale and precision, hydraulic engineering methods for managing water resources, agricultural techniques for maximizing crop yields, and medical procedures for treating diseases and extending human lifespans. The tablet indicates that these technical texts were organized into hierarchical knowledge systems, with basic practical information remaining accessible to human craftsmen, while advanced theoretical principles and sophisticated applications were documented in texts designated for removal or restricted access. The technological documentation included detailed specifications for constructing and operating sophisticated devices that had served various functions in Anunnaki operations. These specifications covered astronomical instruments for precise celestial observations, communication devices for long-distance information transmission, optical systems for magnifying distant objects or revealing fine details, crystalline apparatus for focusing and directing energy, and mechanical calculators for performing complex mathematical operations. The tablets indicate that in many cases, actual devices were dismantled and removed along with their documentation, ensuring that future humans would lack both the knowledge to construct these technologies and physical examples that might enable reverse engineering. The spiritual and esoteric knowledge extraction focused on practices and teachings that had been developed for enhancing human consciousness and establishing connection with non-physical dimensions of reality. Tablet K 7468 describes compilation of texts documenting meditation techniques that could induce specific altered states of consciousness, ritual procedures that facilitated communication with non-physical beings, symbolic systems that encoded multiple layers of meaning, and initiatory practices that progressively revealed advanced spiritual teachings. The tablets indicate that this esoteric knowledge had been carefully guarded even during the period of Anunnaki presence, transmitted only through mystery school initiations to individuals who demonstrated appropriate preparation and character. The departure knowledge extraction involved consolidating these esoteric teachings from various mystery school traditions and either removing them entirely or ensuring their preservation only through highly restricted transmission lineages. The linguistic knowledge extraction involved documentation of language principles that had been developed for encoding technical and esoteric information within apparently ordinary texts. These encoding systems allowed complex knowledge to be embedded within religious myths, administrative records, and literary works, making the information accessible to initiated readers while concealing it from casual observers. The tablets describe how linguistic keys necessary for decoding these hidden knowledge layers were documented in texts designated for removal, effectively ensuring that future human readers would lose access to deeper meanings embedded within preserved texts. The preservation strategy for knowledge that would remain accessible to humans involved creating multiple redundant systems that would ensure survival of essential information through potential civilizational disruptions. The tablets describe how basic knowledge in mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, medicine, and crafts would be preserved through several parallel channels, including temple educational institutions that would train successive generations of specialists, encoded information embedded within religious and literary texts that would be continuously copied and transmitted, physical archives sealed in protected underground repositories, and oral tradition systems maintained by hereditary knowledge keepers. This multi-channel preservation approach recognized that different transmission methods possessed different vulnerabilities, and that comprehensive redundancy would maximize the probability that essential knowledge would survive catastrophic events. The knowledge extraction program included provisions for future restoration of advanced information when human civilization achieved sufficient maturity to use it responsibly. The tablets describe how certain knowledge designated for removal would actually be preserved in sealed archives rather than permanently extracted, with these archives designed to be discovered and accessed when specific conditions were met. These conditions included achievement of certain technological capabilities that would demonstrate readiness for advanced knowledge, development of social and ethical systems that would ensure responsible application of powerful technologies, and appearance of individuals who manifested specific markers indicating genetic qualification for accessing restricted knowledge. The tablets indicate that clues regarding archive locations and access procedures were encoded within preserved texts and architectural features, creating a treasure hunt that could only be solved by future humans who possessed the necessary combination of intellectual capability and spiritual development. Tablet CBS 15623 describes the compilation of comprehensive astronomical observations spanning thousands of years into portable reference systems that could be transported during the departure. The text indicates that this database included not only stellar positions and planetary movements observed from Earth, but also astronomical data collected from other observation points within the solar system. The astronomical database compilation represents one of the most technically sophisticated aspects of the departure preparations, involving the consolidation of observational records from multiple centuries into standardized reference systems that would enable precise celestial calculations and navigation across interplanetary distances. The scope and precision of this database indicate that Anunnaki astronomical capabilities far exceeded the observational and computational abilities typically attributed to ancient civilizations, suggesting access to technologies and observation platforms that enabled data collection impossible through Earth-based naked-eye astronomy alone. The Earth-based observational component of the database drew upon records maintained by temple observatories across Mesopotamia and other regions where Anunnaki influence had established systematic astronomical monitoring programs. The tablet describes how these observational records have been compiled over a period extending back through 40 generations of the Watchers, approximately 1,200 years of continuous celestial monitoring if generations are counted at 30-year intervals. The observational data included precise measurements of stellar positions recorded at regular intervals, documentation of planetary movements through the zodiacal constellations, records of lunar phases and eclipse cycles, observations of meteor showers and cometary appearances, and tracking of unusual celestial phenomena, including what the text describes as wandering lights, that may refer to novae or other transient astronomical events. The precision of the recorded observations indicates use of sophisticated measuring instruments that enabled angular measurements far more accurate than possible through simple, naked-eye observation. The tablets describe positions measured in units that correspond to fractions of a degree, with some critical stellar positions recorded to precision approaching arc minutes. This level of measurement precision requires optical instruments similar to telescopes or specialized viewing apparatus that could isolate celestial objects and measure their positions against calibrated reference scales. The consistency of measurement precision across different observation sites suggests these instruments were produced according to standardized specifications, and that observers received uniform training in their proper use. The extraterrestrial observational component of the database includes astronomical data that could not have been collected from Earth's surface, providing compelling evidence that the Anunnaki possessed capabilities for conducting observations from other locations within the solar system. The tablet describes stellar positions and planetary movements _90, suggesting observation platforms located at various points along interplanetary travel routes. The observational data from these remote platforms includes parallax measurements that would reveal the three-dimensional spatial relationships between celestial objects, observations of planetary faces and surface features that would only be visible from closer vantage points, and documentation of asteroid and comet orbits that would require monitoring from multiple observation positions to calculate accurately. The tablet provides specific examples of extraterrestrial observations that reveal their non-Earth origin. Descriptions of Jupiter's major moons include details about their orbital periods, relative sizes, and surface features that would require telescopic observation from relatively close proximity to the planet. References to Saturn include observations of the Great Ring that encircles the giant wanderer, a feature invisible to naked-eye observers on Earth, but readily apparent when viewed from closer distances or with optical magnification. Most significantly, the tablet describes observations of the distant ice giants beyond the Great Wanderer, likely referring to Uranus and Neptune, planets that were not officially discovered until the 18th and 19th centuries respectively, and whose existence was unknown to ancient human astronomers. The stellar parallax measurements recorded in the database demonstrate observational capabilities that would require either extremely precise instruments operating over extended time periods from Earth's surface, or observations conducted from widely separated positions within the solar system. Parallax measurement involves observing apparent position shifts of nearby stars relative to distant background stars when viewed from different locations, with the magnitude of the shift revealing the distance to the observed star. The tablet describes parallax measurements for over 300 nearby stars, providing distance estimates that correlate remarkably well with modern astronomical measurements. The precision of these parallax values indicates either observation baselines extending across multiple astronomical units, achieved through observations from different planetary positions, or measurement techniques of extraordinary sophistication. The computational systems used to consolidate and standardize the astronomical database incorporated mathematical methods that enabled efficient storage and retrieval of enormous quantities of observational data. The tablet describes how raw observations were processed through standardized calculation procedures that converted measurements from different observation sites and time periods into unified coordinate systems. These computational procedures involved sophisticated geometric transformations that accounted for Earth's orbital motion, rotational variations, and precessional drift, ensuring that observations separated by centuries could be directly compared and integrated into coherent databases. The mathematical techniques described include iterative approximation methods, trigonometric calculations, and coordinate transformation systems that demonstrate advanced understanding of spherical astronomy and computational mathematics. The physical format of the compiled astronomical database involved multiple complementary systems designed to balance portability, durability, and information density. The tablet describes how the most comprehensive observational records were inscribed on ceramic tablets using the finest cuneiform script, with each tablet containing standardized data formats that facilitated efficient information retrieval. For the most critical astronomical parameters, including fundamental star catalogue data and planetary orbital elements, the information was inscribed on metallic plates using techniques that created permanent, corrosion-resistant records. The tablet also describes the creation of mechanical calculation devices that embodied astronomical relationships in physical form, enabling rapid computation of celestial positions without requiring extensive written tables. The stellar catalogue component of the database documented positions and characteristics for several thousand stars organized according to multiple classification systems. Stars were grouped into constellation patterns that facilitated celestial navigation and timekeeping, categorized by brightness into magnitude classes that enabled identification of specific stars, and organized by color and spectral characteristics that would later be recognized as indicators of stellar temperature and composition. The catalogue included proper motion data for stars that showed measurable position changes over centuries of observation, indicating awareness that stars were not fixed in absolute positions, but moved slowly relative to each other across long time periods. The planetary ephemeris data compiled in the database enabled calculation of planetary positions for any date across extended past and future time periods. The computational algorithms embodied in this ephemeris system incorporated understanding of planetary orbital mechanics, including elliptical orbits, variable orbital velocities, and the gravitational perturbations that create complex patterns in planetary movements. The precision of these ephemeris calculations is evident from their incorporation of subtle effects, including orbital precession, nodal regression, and the influence of planetary interactions that cause departures from simple Keplerian orbits. The ability to calculate these effects accurately requires comprehensive understanding of gravitational dynamics that would not be formally developed until Newton's work in the 17th century. The lunar theory incorporated in the database demonstrates equally sophisticated understanding of the moon's complex motions. The tablet describes calculation procedures that account for the evection, variation, and annual equation, three of the most significant irregularities in lunar motion that result from the Sun's gravitational influence on the Earth-Moon system. These lunar motion irregularities create prediction challenges that were not successfully resolved by European astronomy until the 18th century, indicating that Anunnaki astronomical knowledge included detailed understanding of multibody gravitational dynamics, centuries before human astronomers developed similar capabilities. The departure inventories include extensive documentation of medical knowledge and genetic research that had been conducted during the Anunnaki presence. Tablet VAT 21089 describes repositories containing surgical instruments, pharmaceutical preparations, and detailed records of genetic manipulation procedures that have been used to enhance human capabilities and extend lifespans among selected bloodlines. The medical and genetic archives documented in the departure inventories reveal that Anunnaki biological sciences had achieved levels of sophistication that would not be matched by human medicine until the modern era. The systematic organization of these archives and the sophistication of the documented procedures indicate that medical research had been conducted throughout the period of Anunnaki presence on Earth, with accumulated knowledge representing thousands of years of observations, experiments, and refinements. The decision to extract or restrict access to this medical knowledge would have profound implications for subsequent human civilization, condemning populations to centuries of disease and shortened lifespans that advanced medical techniques could have prevented or ameliorated. The surgical instruments documented in the inventories demonstrate remarkable sophistication in design and manufacturing, incorporating metallurgical knowledge and engineering precision that exceeded conventional ancient capabilities. The tablet describes instruments constructed from specialized bronze alloys that combined copper with specific proportions of tin, arsenic, and trace elements that created metals with optimal hardness, corrosion resistance, and edge retention. Cutting instruments included scalpels with blade geometries optimized for different types of incisions, fine-pointed devices for delicate work on small structures, and specialized cutting tools designed for specific surgical procedures. The manufacturing precision described for these instruments included edge finishes measured in terms that suggest sharpness, approaching molecular scale cutting edges, polished surfaces that minimize tissue friction, and ergonomic handle designs that provided optimal control during precise manipulations. The variety of specialized surgical instruments indicates that Anunnaki medicine had developed procedures for interventions across the full range of human anatomy. The tablet describes instruments designed for ophthalmic surgery, including fine hooks and spatulas for cataract removal, orthopedic instruments including bone saws, drills, and forceps for fracture treatment, neurosurgical instruments including trepanation devices for skull opening and specialized probes for brain tissue manipulation, and cardiovascular instruments including clamps and suturing devices that suggest capability for vascular surgery. The sophistication of these specialized instruments indicates that Anunnaki physicians possessed detailed anatomical knowledge and surgical skills that would enable successful treatment of conditions that would be considered incurable or untreatable in subsequent human medical practice for millennia. The pharmaceutical preparations preserved in the medical archives included both plant-derived medications and synthetic compounds that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of chemistry and pharmacology. The tablet describes extensive pharmacopoeias documenting hundreds of medicinal substances with detailed information about their preparation methods, therapeutic applications, dosage guidelines, and potential adverse effects. Plant-derived medications included extracts from specific botanical species prepared through procedures that isolated and concentrated active compounds, combinations of multiple plant substances that produce synergistic therapeutic effects, and specially cultivated plant varieties that had been bred to maximize production of desired medicinal compounds. The preparation methods described involve sophisticated chemical procedures, including distillation, extraction with various solvents, crystallization for purification, and chemical modifications that altered molecular structures to enhance therapeutic properties or reduce toxicity. The synthetic pharmaceutical compounds documented in the archives suggest that Anunnaki chemistry had developed capabilities for creating medicinal substances that did not exist in nature. The tablet describes procedures for synthesizing pain-relieving compounds more potent than plant-derived opiates, antimicrobial substances that could treat infections resistant to natural antibiotics, anti-inflammatory agents that reduce tissue damage without the adverse effects of natural compounds, and longevity-enhancing substances that slowed cellular aging and extended normal human lifespans. The chemical synthesis procedures described involve multi-step reactions, precise temperature and pressure control, use of catalysts to facilitate specific chemical transformations, and purification techniques that isolated desired products from complex reaction mixtures. The sophistication of these synthetic chemistry procedures far exceeds the capabilities documented in ancient alchemical texts, suggesting access to chemical knowledge and laboratory equipment that would not be available to human civilization for thousands of years. The genetic manipulation records documented in the archives provide the most controversial evidence of Anunnaki biological capabilities, describing procedures for deliberately modifying human genetic material to enhance specific characteristics or capabilities. The tablet describes genetic intervention techniques that were applied both to modify existing individuals and to create enhanced bloodlines through selective breeding combined with direct genetic modifications. The procedures described include methods for identifying individuals who carried specific genetic traits, techniques for modifying reproductive cells before conception to ensure desired traits in offspring, and interventions applied to developing embryos that influence their physical and cognitive characteristics. The genetic knowledge underlying these procedures far exceeds anything documented in ancient medical texts and suggests understanding of heredity and genetic mechanisms that anticipated modern molecular genetics by millennia. The genetic enhancement programs documented in the tablets focused on several primary objectives, including increasing physical strength and endurance, enhancing cognitive capabilities and memory, extending natural lifespans beyond normal human parameters, improving resistance to diseases and environmental stresses, and developing what the texts describe as, quote, 93 possibly referring to enhanced intuitive or psychic capabilities. The tablet describes how different enhancement programs were applied to different bloodlines based on their intended social roles, with leadership bloodlines receiving enhancements focused on cognitive capabilities and longevity, warrior bloodlines receiving physical enhancements, priestly bloodlines receiving enhancements related to sensitivity and intuition, and scholarly bloodlines receiving enhancements related to memory and analytical thinking. The longevity extension procedures documented in the archives indicate that selected individuals received treatments that dramatically increased their natural lifespans, potentially explaining the extraordinary reign lengths recorded in the Sumerian king list and similar ancient chronological records. The tablet describes how longevity treatments involved both genetic modifications and ongoing pharmaceutical interventions that together slowed cellular aging processes. The genetic modifications affected cellular repair mechanisms, telomere maintenance systems, and metabolic processes related to aging, while pharmaceutical treatments provided antioxidant protection, enhanced immune function, and supported optimal organ function throughout extended lifespans. The tablet indicates that individuals receiving comprehensive longevity treatments could achieve lifespans extending to several hundred years while maintaining physical and cognitive capabilities well beyond normal human aging trajectories. The departure extraction of medical and genetic knowledge involved multiple strategies depending on the sensitivity and potential applications of specific information. Basic medical knowledge, including treatment of common diseases, surgical procedures for traumatic injuries, and pharmaceutical preparations from readily available natural substances, was preserved through temple medical schools and would remain accessible to human physicians. Intermediate-level medical knowledge, including more sophisticated surgical procedures, complex pharmaceutical preparations, and advanced anatomical understanding, was documented in texts that were sealed in protected archives with restricted access. The most advanced medical knowledge, including genetic manipulation procedures, longevity extension treatments, and synthetic pharmaceutical compounds, was documented in texts that were either removed during the departure or so heavily encrypted that future human physicians would be unable to interpret them without access to specific decoding keys. Beyond written records, the tablets document systematic dismantling and removal of certain technological components from major temple complexes that would prevent future humans from accessing or replicating Anunnaki architectural capabilities. The texts describe removal of specialized construction tools, measurement devices, and what appear to be energy systems that had enabled the precision stone cutting and a massive construction projects characteristic of Anunnaki architecture. The architectural knowledge extraction program documented in the departure inventories reveals that Anunnaki construction capabilities relied on technologies and techniques that were deliberately removed or disabled to prevent future human access. The systematic nature of this extraction and the specific technological components targeted indicate that the Anunnaki recognize their architectural achievements as sources of strategic advantage that should not remain accessible to human civilization following their departure. The removal of these capabilities would effectively ensure that subsequent human cultures would be unable to replicate the precision, scale, and sophistication of Anunnaki construction projects, creating an architectural discontinuity that would puzzle future archaeologists and historians. The specialized construction tools documented for removal included devices for cutting and shaping stone with precision that exceeded conventional ancient stoneworking capabilities. The tablet describes instruments that could _94 suggesting cutting technologies that operated on principles fundamentally different from standard percussion or abrasion methods. These cutting devices incorporated what the texts describe as, quote, 95, possibly referring to focused energy beams that could ablate or molecularly dissociate stone material along precise cutting lines. The removal of these advanced cutting tools would force subsequent stoneworkers to rely on conventional copper and bronze chisels that required exponentially more time and effort to achieve far less precise results. The measurement devices extracted from construction sites included instruments for determining precise angles, distances, and elevations that enabled the extraordinary precision characteristic of Anunnaki architecture. The tablet describes quote, _96, apparently referring to surveying instruments that used astronomical alignments to establish accurate horizontal and vertical references. Other measurement devices described include, quote, 97, possibly referring to instruments that detected gravitational or magnetic field variations to ensure optimal site selection and structural alignment. The extraction of these precision measurement tools would effectively limit human construction capabilities to the accuracy achievable through simpler plumb lines, water levels, and basic surveying techniques. The energy systems removed from temple complexes apparently provided power for various construction operations, including stone cutting, material transport, and environmental control within buildings. The tablet describes quote, 98, suggesting systems that collected and distributed electrical or electromagnetic energy for various applications. These energy collection systems incorporated metallic conductors, crystalline storage or focusing elements, and what the texts describe as, quote, 99, possibly referring to piezoelectric or resonant materials that converted ambient energy into usable forms. The removal of these energy systems would eliminate access to power sources that had enabled construction operations impossible through human muscle power alone. The lifting and transport systems used for moving massive stone blocks receive particular attention in the extraction documentation. The tablet describes devices that could quote, 100, suggesting technologies that could manipulate gravitational forces or create anti-gravity effects. These systems apparently incorporated crystalline elements arranged in specific geometric configurations, metallic components that the texts indicate must be composed of quote, 101 or other special alloys, and energy sources that powered the gravitational manipulation effects. The extraction of these lifting technologies would force subsequent builders to rely on ramps, levers, and human labour for moving massive stones, dramatically limiting the scale of construction projects that could be practically achieved. The precision stone-fitting techniques that created the seamless masonry characteristic of Anunnaki construction apparently relied on temporary stone softening procedures that allowed blocks to be pressed together and then hardened to create perfect interfacing surfaces. The tablet describes treatment of stone surfaces with quote, 102, suggesting chemical or energetic processes that temporarily altered stone crystalline structures. The formulas for these stone softening compounds and the procedures for their application were documented in texts designated for removal, ensuring that future stonemasons would lack access to techniques that had enabled the impossibly precise stone fitting found in Anunnaki structures. The architectural knowledge extraction extended to documentation of structural engineering principles that had enabled construction of buildings of unprecedented scale and durability. The tablet describes removal of texts that explained quote, 103, apparently referring to stress distribution analysis and structural optimization methods. These engineering principles incorporated mathematical calculation procedures, geometric relationships that determined optimal structural configurations, and material science knowledge that enabled selection of stone types and construction techniques appropriate for specific structural applications. The extraction of this advanced engineering knowledge would limit subsequent architectural development to empirical methods based on trial and error rather than theoretical understanding of structural mechanics. The temple orientation and astronomical alignment principles that connected Anunnaki buildings to celestial phenomena were preserved only in restricted form that allowed basic solar and lunar alignments, while concealing the sophisticated astronomical knowledge embedded in more complex building orientations. The tablet describes how certain alignment procedures required understanding of precessional drift, stellar proper motions, and long-term celestial cycles that would not be rediscovered by human astronomy for millennia. The documentation of these advanced alignment principles was extracted to prevent future temple builders from replicating the full astronomical sophistication of Anunnaki sacred architecture. Tablet K 9876 from the British Museum provides detailed specifications for communication equipment that was either removed or deliberately disabled during the departure process. The text describes crystalline devices, metallic resonance chambers, and optical systems that had enabled communication across vast distances, all of which were systematically deactivated or extracted to prevent unauthorized human access to interplanetary communication capabilities. The communication technologies documented in this tablet represent some of the most sophisticated equipment operated by the Anunnaki during their earthly presence. Incorporating principles of electromagnetic transmission, crystalline resonance, and what the texts describe as _104_ that may reference quantum entanglement or other advanced physics phenomena. The systematic removal or disabling of these communication systems effectively isolated Earth from whatever broader network of civilizations or installations the Anunnaki maintained beyond the planet, ensuring that humanity would develop in isolation without access to external sources of information or assistance. The primary communication devices described in the tablet employed large crystalline structures that functioned as what modern technology would recognize as sophisticated transmitter-receiver systems. These devices, which the text terms _105_ consisted of precisely shaped quartz crystals measuring between 1 and 3 cubits in height, mounted within elaborate metallic frameworks that included multiple conducting elements, focusing mirrors, and what appear to be tuning mechanisms that adjusted operational frequencies. The tablet provides detailed specifications for crystal preparation, including grinding procedures that achieved optical surfaces accurate to fractions of a wavelength, orientation requirements that aligned crystal axes to specific astronomical directions, and activation procedures that involved applying precise electrical potentials to metallic contacts positioned at specific points on the crystal surfaces. The metallic resonance chambers described in the tablet functioned as amplification and directional focusing systems that enhanced communication signals and directed them towards specific celestial coordinates. These chambers were constructed as precisely dimensioned enclosures lined with copper, silver, or gold depending on the specific frequencies being transmitted, with dimensions calculated according to mathematical relationships that created standing wave patterns optimized for signal amplification. The tablet describes how chamber dimensions were derived from _106_ mathematical constants that correspond to wavelength relationships for electromagnetic radiation. The geometric precision required for effective chamber operation demanded construction tolerances measured in fractions of a fingerbreadth, indicating sophisticated metalworking capabilities and mathematical understanding of wave mechanics. The optical systems incorporated into the communication installations included large focusing mirrors and lens arrays that collected and directed both visible light and what the texts describe as _107_ likely referring to infrared or other non-visible electromagnetic radiation. These optical components were constructed from polished metallic surfaces for reflectors and from precisely ground crystalline materials for refractive elements, with surface accuracies that enabled diffraction-limited optical performance. The tablet describes how optical systems were mounted on mechanical frameworks that allowed precise pointing towards specific celestial coordinates, with adjustment mechanisms that compensated for Earth's rotation and enabled tracking of moving targets across the sky. The communication protocols described in the tablet reveal that the Anunnaki maintained regular contact with installations or vessels located at various points within the solar system and potentially beyond. The communication schedule was synchronized to astronomical cycles, with specific transmission windows occurring when optimal geometric alignments existed between Earth and the target locations. The tablet describes transmission procedures that involve precise timing based on stellar positions, use of specific carrier frequencies selected according to destination distance and atmospheric conditions, and encoding protocols that packaged information into standardized formats for efficient transmission and accurate decoding at receiving stations. The information transmitted through these communication systems included operational reports documenting activities and resource status on Earth, requests for instructions or technical assistance from higher authorities, scientific data collected through Earth-based observations and experiments, and personal communications between Anunnaki personnel on Earth and their counterparts at other locations. The tablet indicates that communication throughput was substantial, with regular transmissions occurring at intervals of every few days during optimal communication windows. The volume and regularity of these communications suggests that Earth operations were closely coordinated with broader Anunnaki activities, and that significant bandwidth existed for information exchange. The deactivation procedures described in the tablet reveal systematic approaches to rendering communication equipment inoperative, while minimizing the possibility that future humans might repair or reactivate the systems. For crystalline transmitter components, deactivation involved introducing precise fractures at critical locations within crystal structures that destroyed their resonant properties while leaving the crystals superficially intact. For metallic resonance chambers, deactivation procedures included removal of key conducting elements, introduction of structural modifications that altered chamber dimensions beyond functional tolerances, and in some cases complete dismantling with removal of components for transport off-world. For optical systems, deactivation involved removal of critical mirror and lens elements, deliberate introduction of surface degradation that destroyed optical precision, and dismantling of mechanical pointing and tracking systems. The tablet documents removal of control systems and technical documentation that would have enabled humans to understand communication device operating principles and potentially reconstruct functional equipment. These control systems included what appeared to be early computational devices that automated transmission scheduling, frequency selection, and signal encoding. The removal of these control systems and their associated documentation effectively ensured that even if physical communication equipment remained partially intact, future humans would lack the knowledge necessary to operate it successfully or to construct replacement systems based on Anunnaki designs. The psychological impact of communication system deactivation on Anunnaki personnel who would remain behind as guardians receives brief mention in the tablet. These individuals would effectively be cut off from regular contact with their civilization, able to maintain only limited communications through less sophisticated methods during rare optimal windows. The tablet describes how remaining guardians received special communication devices of reduced capability that would enable emergency contact under specific circumstances, suggesting that complete isolation was not intended even though routine communication infrastructure was being dismantled. Perhaps the most technologically significant aspect of the departure involved removal of energy generation and distribution systems that had powered Anunnaki facilities throughout Mesopotamia. The tablets describe underground power installations that utilize principles unknown to conventional ancient technology, incorporating crystalline components, metallic conductors, and geological energy extraction that provided virtually unlimited power for Anunnaki operations. The energy systems documented in the departure inventories represent perhaps the most revolutionary technology operated by the Anunnaki, providing power capabilities that would have enabled all their other technological achievements, while operating on principles that remain partially mysterious even when described in the technical terminology preserved in the tablets. The removal of these energy systems would have immediate and catastrophic effects on Anunnaki facility operations, forcing systematic shutdown of technologies that depended on abundant power availability and reducing subsequent human civilizations to reliance on muscle power, animal power, and primitive fire-based energy sources for thousands of years. The underground power installations that form the backbone of Anunnaki energy infrastructure were located at depths ranging from 50 to 100 cubits below surface level, positioned to access what the tablets describe as the fire that flows through Earth's deep places. This description appears to reference geothermal energy, tapping into the Earth's internal heat through deep boreholes that reached zones where rock temperatures were sufficient to enable heat extraction. The tablets describe how these geothermal installations included systems for circulating fluids through hot rock formations, extracting heat energy that was then converted to other forms of useful power through mechanisms the texts describe in technical detail. The energy conversion systems that transformed geothermal heat into usable power forms incorporated what the tablets term _109 apparently describing thermoelectric or similar solid-state conversion devices. These conversion systems utilize crystalline materials with specific thermal and electrical properties, arranged in geometric configurations that optimized energy conversion efficiency. The tablet provides specifications for converter construction, including crystal types and purity requirements, geometric arrangement patterns that created cascaded conversion stages, and thermal management systems that maintained optimal operating temperatures. The conversion efficiencies described in the tablets exceed those achievable with modern thermoelectric materials, suggesting the Anunnaki had developed advanced materials or employed conversion principles not yet understood by contemporary physics. The power distribution systems that delivered energy from underground generation stations to surface facilities incorporated conducting networks that the tablets describe as __, quote _1, 10 __. These distribution systems included substantial underground cable networks, constructed from high-purity copper and silver conductors, insulated using ceramic and bitumen materials that prevented energy loss through ground contact, and protected within stone-lined conduits that provided mechanical protection and environmental isolation. The tablet describes how distribution networks were arranged in redundant configurations that ensured continued power availability even if individual conductors failed, and included what appear to be transformers or voltage regulation devices that adjusted power characteristics for different applications. The energy storage systems that buffered power generation and consumption variations employed crystalline components that the tablets describe as capable of holding quote 111 for extended periods without degradation. These energy storage devices apparently functioned as early capacitors or batteries, accumulating electrical charge during periods of excess generation and releasing stored energy during periods of high demand. The tablet provides specifications for storage device construction, including crystalline material types, electrode configurations using specific metals, and electrolyte solutions that facilitated charge transfer. The energy densities described for these storage systems exceed those of conventional batteries by substantial margins, suggesting advanced electrochemical principles or possibly supercapacitor technologies. The power applications documented in the tablets reveal that Anunnaki facilities consumed enormous amounts of energy for operations, including metalwork in furnaces that achieved temperatures capable of processing refractory metals, stone cutting and shaping equipment that required high power density for effective material removal, atmospheric and environmental control systems that maintained optimal conditions within buildings, communication systems that transmitted signals across interplanetary distances, and what the texts describe as, quote, 112, possibly referring to equipment for manipulating electromagnetic fields or other energetic phenomena. The energy generation capacities documented in the tablets far exceed the power requirements of normal ancient Mesopotamian society, with output levels described in terms that suggest megawatt-scale power production from individual installations. The tablet indicates that major temple complexes at cities including Nippur, Eridu, Uruk and Babylon each possessed substantial power generation facilities, with additional smaller installations at secondary sites. The total power infrastructure described would have provided energy availability comparable to industrial societies, enabling technological capabilities that would be impossible to achieve through pre-industrial power sources. The systematic dismantling of energy systems during the departure involved multiple stages designed to ensure that remaining installations could not be reactivated, and that knowledge of energy generation principles would not be accessible to future humans. The initial dismantling stage involved controlled shutdown of generation systems, draining of thermal storage, and de-energizing of distribution networks. The second stage involved physical removal of critical components, including crystalline converters, energy storage devices, and control systems. The third stage involved deliberate destruction of remaining infrastructure through introduction of fractures in conduits, contamination of underground chambers with materials that would prevent future use, and in some cases complete filling and sealing of underground installations. The tablet documents partial preservation of certain energy system components in sealed archives, suggesting that complete elimination of energy technology was not intended. These preserved components included examples of crystalline converters, energy storage devices, and technical documentation describing operating principles and construction methods. The preservation of these materials indicates an intention to enable eventual restoration of advanced energy systems when human civilization achieves sufficient maturity to use them responsibly. Though the accessibility conditions for these archives would prevent premature discovery, administrative records document extensive hydraulic engineering systems that were systematically dismantled or sealed during the withdrawal. These systems, described in tablet series CBS 16,000 through 16,500, incorporated advanced understanding of fluid dynamics, pressure management, and water purification that enabled Anunnaki settlements to maintain sophisticated water supplies regardless of environmental conditions. The water management systems operated by the Anunnaki represented critical infrastructure that enabled urban concentrations far exceeding the population densities that natural water resources would normally support. The sophistication of these hydraulic systems included capabilities for long-distance water transport, pressure-driven distribution through building interiors, advanced filtration and purification that ensured water quality, and wastewater management that prevented environmental contamination. The removal of these systems during the departure would force subsequent civilizations to rely on simpler water supply methods, including wells, cisterns, and open channels that provided far less reliable and lower quality water supplies. The long-distance water transport systems documented in the tablets included sophisticated aqueduct networks that moved water from distant sources to urban centres through combinations of gravity flow pressure conduits and what appeared to be pumping stations that lifted water across elevation changes. The tablet describes how aqueduct routes were surveyed using precision instruments to establish optimal gradients that maximize flow rates while maintaining structural feasibility. The construction specifications for aqueduct conduits included waterproof linings using bitumen and ceramic materials, pressure-resistant pipe sections constructed from fired clay or metallic materials, and inspection and maintenance access points positioned at regular intervals. The engineering sophistication described in these specifications exceeds that of later Roman aqueducts, which are typically considered the peak of ancient hydraulic engineering. The pumping systems that lifted water to elevated reservoirs or delivered pressurized water to buildings incorporated mechanical devices driven by the energy generation systems previously described. The tablet provides detailed specifications for pump construction, including cylinder dimensions, piston configurations, valve designs that controlled flow direction, and lubrication systems that reduced friction and wear. The pump performance characteristics described include discharge pressures sufficient to deliver water to multi-story buildings and flow rates adequate to serve large urban populations. The precision engineering required for effective pump operation demanded tight manufacturing tolerances and sophisticated metallurgy that produced corrosion-resistant components capable of long-term operation in aqueous environments. The water distribution. Systems within buildings included extensive pipe networks that delivered water throughout interior spaces, enabling conveniences including indoor water supplies for cooking and cleaning, sophisticated sanitation systems with water-flushed waste removal, and decorative water features that enhanced architectural aesthetics. The tablet describes how distribution pipe networks were constructed from copper, bronze, or fired clay pipes depending on pressure requirements and water chemistry conditions. The pipe joining methods described include sophisticated sealing techniques using lead, bitumen, or mechanical compression fittings that created leak-proof connections. The distribution systems incorporated flow control valves, pressure regulation devices, and branch configurations that enabled selective water delivery to different building areas. The water purification systems employed by the Anunnaki incorporated multiple treatment stages that removed sediments, eliminated pathogenic organisms, and improved taste and appearance. The tablet describes filtration systems using progressively finer media, including gravel, sand, and what appears to be activated charcoal or similar adsorbent materials. The purification process included sedimentation basins, where suspended particles settled under gravity, chemical treatment using mineral compounds that cause particle aggregation and pathogen inactivation, and final polishing stages that removed remaining contaminants. The water quality achieved through these purification systems exceeded that available through simple settling or boiling, providing consistently safe water supplies that reduced disease transmission through contaminated water. The wastewater management systems that collected and treated sewage from buildings incorporated underground drainage networks that transported waste away from inhabited areas using gravity flow to treatment facilities. The tablet describes how wastewater collection systems employed sealed conduits that prevented contamination of surrounding soil and groundwater, incorporated flowing water that continuously cleared waste material, and included access points for cleaning and maintenance. The treatment facilities described in the tablets included settling basins where solids separated from liquids, filtration beds where liquid waste percolated through biological media that degraded organic contaminants, and final discharge systems that released treated effluent into rivers or irrigation systems after treatment rendered it environmentally acceptable. The irrigation systems that supported agricultural production incorporated water distribution networks that delivered precisely controlled water quantities to fields, enabling intensive cultivation and multiple crop cycles per year. The tablet describes how irrigation systems included primary canals that transported water from rivers or reservoirs to agricultural areas, secondary distribution channels that delivered water to individual fields, and control structures that regulated flow rates and water levels. The irrigation infrastructure incorporated measurement devices that monitored water usage, scheduling systems that synchronized irrigation with crop requirements, and drainage systems that prevented waterlogging and salinization that would degrade soil productivity. The dismantling procedures for water systems documented in the tablets reveal systematic approaches that rendered installations inoperative while concealing evidence of their sophisticated engineering. The removal process included draining of pipeline networks, removal of pumps and control devices, deliberate fracturing of pressure conduits, and filling of underground conduits with debris that would prevent future use. The tablet describes how certain water treatment facilities were completely buried, with surface evidence eliminated to prevent discovery by future populations. The knowledge documentation for water system design and operation was either removed or sealed in restricted archives, ensuring that the engineering principles underlying Anunnaki hydraulic capabilities would not remain accessible to subsequent civilizations. The departure inventories reveal that Anunnaki agricultural capabilities extended far beyond conventional farming techniques to include genetic modification of crop plants, soil enhancement technologies, and environmental control systems that dramatically increased agricultural productivity. The tablets document removal of genetic stock, enhancement compounds, and technological systems that had enabled Mesopotamian agriculture to support large urban populations on relatively limited arable land. The agricultural enhancement programs operated by the Anunnaki represented systematic efforts to increase food production through multiple complementary approaches, including development of improved crop varieties, enhancement of soil fertility and structure, management of water resources, control of pests and diseases, and modification of environmental conditions to extend growing seasons and expand cultivable areas. The agricultural productivity achieved through these enhancement programs far exceeded what natural conditions and primitive farming methods could support, enabling urban populations and specialized craft production that would be impossible in subsistence agricultural societies. The removal of these agricultural technologies during the departure would force subsequent populations to rely on less productive farming methods, likely contributing to the population declines and reduced urban complexity that characterized post-Sumerian Mesopotamia. The crop genetic modification programs documented in the tablets reveal systematic efforts to develop plant varieties with enhanced characteristics including increased yield, improved nutritional content, resistance to pests and diseases, tolerance of environmental stresses including drought and salinity, and shorter maturation times that enabled multiple crops per growing season. The tablet describes how these improved varieties were developed through both selective breeding programs that concentrated desired traits over multiple generations and through direct genetic interventions that the texts describe as, quote, 113. The genetic intervention procedures described suggest capabilities for controlled hybridization, possibly including techniques for overcoming natural reproductive barriers between species that would not normally cross-pollinate. The grain varieties developed through these programs included forms of wheat, barley, and other cereals that produced substantially larger seed heads, possessed stronger stems that resisted lodging under heavy grain loads, and matured more rapidly than wild progenitor species. The tablet provides detailed descriptions of specific varieties, including their yield characteristics, optimal growing conditions, and resistance properties. Some described varieties possessed multiple desirable traits simultaneously: drought tolerance combined with high yield, pest resistance combined with improved grain quality, suggesting sophisticated breeding programs or genetic engineering capabilities that could introduce multiple genetic modifications in coordinated fashion. The fruit and vegetable varieties documented in the tablets included forms that would be unrecognizable to modern botanists familiar with wild species, possessing characteristics including dramatically increased fruit size, enhanced sweetness, or other desirable flavor characteristics. Reduced seed content and in some cases seedless varieties that would require vegetative propagation. The development of seedless varieties particularly suggests advanced understanding of plant reproductive biology and capability for manipulating flowering and fruiting processes through genetic or hormonal interventions. The tablet describes how certain fruit varieties had been modified to extend shelf life through changes that delayed ripening or increased resistance to decay. enabling transport and storage over extended periods. The soil enhancement technologies documented in the tablets incorporated both biological and chemical approaches to improving soil fertility and structure. The biological enhancement methods included what the texts describe as _quote_114_, apparently referring to beneficial soil microorganisms that fix nitrogen, solubilized phosphorus, or enhance nutrient availability through other mechanisms. The tablet describes how these microbial inoculants were prepared through culturing procedures that multiplied beneficial organisms mixed with carrier materials that protected them during storage and application, and applied to fields using specific protocols that optimize colonization of crop root zones. The chemical soil enhancement methods employed mineral amendments that provided essential plant nutrients, modified soil pH to optimal ranges for crop growth, and improved soil structure to enhance water retention and aeration. The tablet describes how specific mineral compounds were prepared from natural ore sources through grinding, purification, and chemical processing that converted them to plant-available forms. The application protocols described include precise dosage recommendations based on soil type and crop requirements, timing guidelines that synchronized amendments with crop growth stages, and incorporation methods that ensured proper distribution throughout root zones. The environmental control systems that extended growing seasons and expanded cultivable areas included what the tablets describe as quote 115 and quote 116. The frost protection systems apparently employed some form of heating or atmospheric modification that prevented damaging low temperatures during critical growing periods. The tablet describes installations positioned throughout agricultural areas that could be activated when frost threatened, generating heat or altering local atmospheric conditions to protect crops. The technology underlying these systems remains somewhat mysterious, though descriptions suggesting the use of _quote_117_ may indicate chemical heating methods or possibly controlled combustion systems. The artificial rain systems described in the tablets incorporated capabilities for inducing precipitation through atmospheric modification techniques. The descriptions include references to quote 118, equipped with metallic structures that the texts indicate could quote 119. This description suggests weather modification technology employing electrical discharge or other energetic methods to trigger condensation and precipitation. The tablet indicates these systems were deployed during drought periods to ensure adequate water supplies for crops, though their use required careful management to avoid excessive rainfall that could damage crops or cause flooding. The pest and disease control methods documented in the tablets included both preventive measures that reduced pest populations and disease incidents, and curative treatments that eliminated problems after they appeared. The preventive approaches included crop rotation systems that disrupted pest life cycles, use of companion planting that deterred pests through natural plant compounds, and maintenance of beneficial predator insects that controlled pest populations biologically. The curative treatments included application of plant-derived compounds with insecticidal or fungicidal properties, use of mineral substances that prevented disease spread, and in severe cases what the texts describe as _quote _120_ that eliminated heavily infested areas to prevent further spread. Tablet B M 45789 describes comprehensive metallurgical knowledge that was systematically removed or destroyed during the departure to prevent human access to advanced metalworking capabilities. The text indicates that Anunnaki metallurgy involved not merely smelting and alloying, but manipulation of metallic properties at levels that required understanding of atomic structure and quantum mechanics. The metallurgical capabilities documented in the departure inventories represent perhaps the most tangible evidence of Anunnaki technological sophistication, producing materials with properties that conventional ancient metalworking could not achieve, and demonstrating understanding of metal physics that would not be formally developed until the 20th century. The systematic removal of this metallurgical knowledge during the departure effectively reset human metalworking capabilities to primitive levels, forcing subsequent civilizations to redevelop techniques for bronze production, iron working, and steelmaking through centuries of empirical experimentation without benefit of the theoretical understanding that had enabled Anunnaki metallurgical achievements. The tablet begins with a comprehensive taxonomy of metals and their properties, describing not only common metals including copper, tin, lead, silver, and gold, but also more exotic materials including platinum group metals, rare earth elements, and materials the texts describe using terminology that has no clear modern equivalents. The property descriptions for each metal demonstrate sophisticated understanding of characteristics including melting points, hardness, electrical and thermal conductivity, chemical reactivity, and what the texts term, quote, a 1-to-1, possibly referring to magnetic or other field interactions. The precision of these property descriptions matches modern materials, science data with remarkable accuracy, indicating that Anunnaki metallurgists possessed comprehensive empirical knowledge, supplemented by theoretical understanding of metallic behavior at atomic scales. The alloy development procedures documented in the tablet reveal systematic approaches to creating materials with engineered properties optimized for specific applications. The tablet describes how alloys were developed through controlled mixing of base metals with precisely measured quantities of additional elements that modified mechanical, electrical, or chemical properties. The composition specifications provided include exact percentage ratios for major alloying elements and trace additions measured in parts per thousand or smaller, indicating capabilities for precise composition control during alloy preparation. The property relationships described demonstrate understanding that small composition variations could produce dramatic property changes, requiring tight process control to achieve consistent results. The bronze alloys described in the tablet include compositions optimized for different applications, including structural bronze with enhanced strength for architectural components, bearing bronze with improved wear resistance for mechanical applications, mirror bronze with enhanced reflectivity for optical systems, and what the text term underscore, quote underscore 122 underscore with specific acoustic properties for musical instruments or acoustic devices. The optimization of bronze properties through composition control and heat treatment represents sophisticated materials engineering that exceeded the empirical bronze working practiced by most ancient civilizations. The iron and steel working procedures documented in the tablet demonstrate capabilities far beyond the primitive iron, smelting and forging typical of early Iron Age societies. The tablet describes production of high-purity iron through refined smelting processes that eliminated most impurities, conversion of iron to steel through controlled addition of carbon, and heat treatment procedures that optimize steel properties for different applications. The steel heat treatment procedures described include specific temperature ranges, holding times, and cooling rates that correspond to modern metallurgical practices for producing hardened steel, tempered steel, and case-hardened steel with hard surfaces and tough cores. The advanced alloys described in the tablet include materials with properties suggesting they incorporated principles not officially discovered until modern metallurgy, including precipitation hardening, transformation hardening, and possibly even metallic glass formation. The precipitation hardening descriptions explain how certain alloys gain strength through aging at specific temperatures, with the tablet providing time-temperature protocols that match modern precipitation hardening practices for aluminum and other alloy systems. The transformation hardening descriptions discuss structural changes that occur during cooling from high temperatures, with property evolution matching that observed in modern martensitic transformations. The The surface treatment technologies documented in the tablet enabled modification of metal surface properties without altering bulk material characteristics. These treatments included case-hardening procedures that created hard surface layers on softer substrates, plating techniques that applied thin layers of corrosion-resistant or decorative metals to base materials, and chemical treatments that formed protective oxide or other compound layers. The plating procedures described involve electrochemical processes remarkably similar to modern electroplating, including use of conducting solutions, electrical current application, and careful control of deposition conditions to achieve uniform coating thickness and properties. The observatory facilities at major ziggurats were systematically stripped of their most sophisticated equipment during the withdrawal period. Babylonian administrative texts describe removal of large-scale astronomical instruments, including reflecting systems, mechanical calculators, and what appear to be telescopic devices that had enabled precision stellar observations impossible with naked eye astronomy. The astronomical instrument extraction documented in these administrative texts reveals that Anunnaki observational capabilities far exceeded what could be achieved through unaided human vision. Incorporating optical technologies and mechanical computation systems that would not be reinvented by human civilization for thousands of years, the observatory installations at Babylon, Nippur, Uruk, and other major centers had functioned as sophisticated research facilities that conducted systematic celestial monitoring, calculated complex astronomical phenomena, and maintained the comprehensive databases that enabled Anunnaki navigation and chronological systems. The removal of these instruments during the departure effectively blinded subsequent human astronomers, forcing them to rely on naked eye observations that could detect only the brightest celestial objects, and limiting their computational capabilities to manual calculations that required enormous time and effort. The reflecting systems described in the administrative tablets functioned as large-scale mirrors that collected and focused celestial light, enabling observation of faint objects invisible to unaided vision. These reflecting systems incorporated polished metallic mirrors with surface accuracies measured in fractions of a wavelength, mounted on mechanical frameworks that allowed precise pointing and tracking of celestial objects across the sky. The tablet describes mirrors constructed from copper or bronze that had been polished to extraordinary smoothness using abrasive compounds and specialized polishing techniques, then coated with silver or gold to enhance reflectivity. The mirror dimensions described range from 1 cubit to 5 cubits in diameter, with the largest installations requiring substantial structural supports and complex mounting systems that enabled adjustment of mirror orientation despite their significant weight. The optical quality achieved in these reflecting systems indicates manufacturing capabilities that exceeded conventional ancient metalworking by substantial margins. The surface accuracy requirements for astronomical mirrors demand that deviations from ideal curvature remain below approximately 1/8 wavelength of visible light, corresponding to surface irregularities smaller than 1/10,000th of a millimeter. Achieving such precision requires not only skilled craftsmanship, but also measurement techniques capable of detecting minute surface variations and polishing procedures that can remove material in controlled fashion to correct detected errors. The tablet describes quality control procedures involving examination of mirror surfaces using interference phenomena created by placing optically flat reference surfaces in contact with mirrors being tested, a technique that would not be reinvented until the 19th century. The mechanical mounting systems for reflecting instruments incorporated features that enabled precise pointing towards specific celestial coordinates and smooth tracking of objects as they moved across the sky due to Earth's rotation. The tablet describes mounting frameworks constructed from bronze or iron that supported mirror assemblies while allowing rotation about 2 perpendicular axes, providing the degrees of freedom necessary to point mirrors anywhere in the visible sky. The rotation mechanisms incorporated what appear to be worm gears and other precision mechanical elements that enabled fine adjustments of mirror orientation measured in fractions of a degree. The tracking systems included timekeeping devices that drove mirror rotation at rates synchronized to Earth's rotation, maintaining celestial objects within the instrument field of view throughout extended observation periods. The mechanical calculators extracted from observatory facilities functioned as specialized computing devices that automated complex astronomical calculations that would otherwise require extensive manual computation. These calculators, which the tablets describe as _123, incorporated multiple interconnected gear wheels, with tooth counts carefully selected to represent astronomical ratios, including planetary orbital periods, lunar cycles, and precessional periods. The tablet provides detailed specifications for calculator construction, including gear tooth counts for different astronomical cycles, gear arrangement patterns that created the necessary mechanical relationships, and operational procedures that set initial calculator states and extracted calculated results. The most sophisticated calculators described in the tablets incorporated dozens of gears arranged in complex gear trains that enabled calculation of planetary positions, eclipse predictions, and calendar conversions through mechanical computation that paralleled the mathematical procedures documented in astronomical texts. The accuracy of these mechanical calculators depended on precision gear cutting that ensured accurate tooth spacing and smooth gear meshing, requiring manufacturing tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter. The tablet describes gear cutting procedures involving use of specialized tools and jigs that maintained consistent tooth geometry, along with quality control procedures that verified gear accuracy through trial assembly and operational testing. The telescopic devices mentioned in the administrative texts represent perhaps the most technologically advanced astronomical instruments operated by the Anunnaki, incorporating both refracting and reflecting optical configurations that magnified distant objects and revealed details invisible to unaided vision. The tablet descriptions of these devices include references to quote 124, fitted with precisely shaped transparent stones at each end, clearly describing refracting telescope configurations with objective and eyepiece lenses. The optical specifications provided include focal lengths, aperture dimensions, and magnification factors that indicate these telescopes achieved optical performance comparable to early modern astronomical telescopes despite being constructed thousands of years earlier. The refracting telescope configurations described in the tablets employed quartz crystal lenses that had been ground and polished to precise optical curves, with surface accuracy sufficient to produce diffraction-limited image quality. The lens manufacturing procedures described involve grinding operations using progressively finer abrasives, polishing stages using specialized compounds that produced optically smooth surfaces, and quality testing procedures that verified optical performance through examination of stellar images. The telescope tubes that housed these optical systems were constructed from bronze or copper, with precise internal dimensions that maintained proper lens spacing and included baffling systems that reduced scattered light to maximize image contrast. The reflecting telescope configurations, described as alternatives to refracting designs, employed curved mirrors as objective elements that collected and focused celestial light, eliminating the chromatic aberration problems that limit refracting telescope performance. These reflecting telescopes incorporated primary mirrors with parabolic or spherical curvature, secondary mirrors that redirected focused light to accessible viewing positions, and eyepiece systems that magnified the primary mirror focal plane image. The optical advantages of reflecting designs for large aperture instruments were apparently recognized by Anunnaki astronomers, who constructed reflecting telescopes with apertures up to 3 cubits in diameter that collected far more light than practical refracting telescopes and enabled observation of extremely faint celestial objects. The tablet documents systematic extraction of all major astronomical instruments during the departure period, with removal procedures that ensured instruments could not be restored to operational condition from remaining components. The extraction process involved careful dismantling that preserved instrument components for transport, documentation of removal procedures to ensure completeness, and verification that all critical optical and mechanical elements had been successfully extracted. For instruments too large or fragile to transport intact, the tablets describe controlled destruction procedures that rendered components unusable, while minimizing debris that might provide clues about instrument design and capabilities. Among the most intriguing departure inventory items are references to quote 125 and quote 126 that were either transported during the withdrawal or deliberately destroyed to prevent human access. Tablet VAT 19847 describes specifications for these craft, including propulsion, systems, navigation equipment, and life support capabilities that enabled travel beyond Earth's atmosphere. The transportation technology records preserved in this tablet provide perhaps the most direct evidence that Anunnaki capabilities included spacefaring vehicles that enabled travel between Earth and other locations within the solar system or beyond. The technical specifications documented suggest these vehicles represented sophisticated engineering that incorporated advanced propulsion systems, environmental control capabilities, navigation equipment, and structural designs optimized for operation in both atmospheric and space environments. The removal or destruction of these vehicles during the departure ensured that human civilization would remain earthbound for millennia, lacking the technological capabilities necessary for space exploration until the mid-20th century development of rocket technology. The propulsion systems described in the tablet employed principles that appear fundamentally different from conventional rocket propulsion, avoiding the enormous fuel mass requirements that make rocket travel inefficient for extensive space operations. The tablet describes propulsion units termed firestones that generated thrust without requiring continuous consumption of propellant material, suggesting the use of some form of energy-based propulsion rather than chemical reaction mass acceleration. The firestone descriptions include references to crystalline components that transform the subtle essence into the force that pushes, possibly describing conversion of electrical or other forms of energy into momentum transfer that produces thrust. The propulsion system specifications provided in the tablet include thrust output levels, power consumption requirements, and operational endurance figures that suggest capabilities for sustained acceleration over extended periods. The thrust levels described would enable continuous acceleration at rates sufficient to reach orbital velocities within hours, rather than the minutes required for high-thrust rocket launches, providing more gentle acceleration profiles that would reduce structural loads and improve passenger comfort. The sustained operation capabilities described would enable continuous thrust application throughout interplanetary journeys, dramatically reducing travel times compared to conventional orbital transfer trajectories that rely on brief propulsive burns at trajectory endpoints. The vehicle structural designs documented in the tablet incorporated features optimized for operation in both atmospheric and space environments, including streamlined external configurations that reduced atmospheric drag during launch and re-entry phases, thermal protection systems that managed the intense heating encountered during high-speed atmospheric flight, and pressure vessel construction that maintained habitable internal environments while withstanding the pressure differential between cabin atmosphere and space vacuum. The tablet describes hull construction using multiple layers of different materials, including metallic outer skins that provided structural strength and thermal protection, intermediate layers of insulating materials that reduced heat transfer, and internal pressure shells that contained habitable atmosphere. The navigation systems described in the tablet enabled precise determination of vehicle position and velocity through both Earth-based and celestial reference systems, allowing accurate guidance during all flight phases, including atmospheric launch, orbital operations, interplanetary crews, and landing approaches. The navigation equipment included instruments for measuring angular positions of stars and planets that provided celestial navigation capabilities, sensors that detected gravitational and magnetic fields for dead reckoning navigation, and communication systems that enabled ground-based tracking and guidance when operating near Earth. The tablet describes navigation calculation procedures that process these sensor measurements to determine current position and velocity, compare actual trajectory against planned flight path, and compute correction maneuvers necessary to maintain desired trajectory. The life support systems incorporated in these vehicles maintained habitable environmental conditions during extended flight operations lasting days to months depending on mission destination. The tablet describes atmospheric processing systems that removed carbon dioxide exhaled by crew members and replenished oxygen consumed through respiration, water recycling systems that recovered water from humidity and waste streams for reuse, temperature control systems that maintained comfortable cabin conditions despite extreme external temperatures, and food storage and preparation facilities that provided adequate nutrition during extended missions. The environmental control specifications provided suggest these systems could support crews of 3 to 10 individuals for periods ranging from 10 days for lunar missions to several months for voyages to more distant destinations. The vehicle capacity specifications documented in the tablet indicate that different vehicle types were designed for different mission profiles, including small shuttlecraft optimized for Earth surface to orbital transport, medium-range vehicles designed for cislunar operations, and large interplanetary craft capable of voyages to Mars and more distant locations. The shuttlecraft descriptions indicate passenger capacities of approximately 5 to 20 individuals with minimal cargo space, optimized for frequent flights between ground bases and orbital facilities. The interplanetary vehicles described incorporate substantially larger habitable volumes, with capacity for extended missions carrying crews of 10 to 30 plus cargo holds for transporting equipment, supplies, or materials collected during missions. The departure inventory indicates that most sky vehicles were transported off-world during the withdrawal, though a small number designated as guardians of the sky paths were retained in concealed locations for potential emergency use by Anunnaki personnel remaining on Earth. The tablet describes how transported vehicles were staged at orbital assembly points, where they were integrated into larger transport vessels for the journey to whatever destination the departing Anunnaki travelled. For vehicles designated for destruction rather than transport, the tablets describe systematic dismantling procedures that separated vehicles into components, followed by controlled destruction of critical systems including propulsion units, navigation equipment, and life support systems to ensure vehicles could not be reconstructed or reverse engineered. The tablets document extensive facilities dedicated to genetic research and biological enhancement that were systematically dismantled during the departure. These installations, described in cuneiform text from Uruk and Eridu, incorporated laboratory equipment, specimen storage systems, and what appear to be genetic modification technologies that have been used to create enhanced human bloodlines and hybrid life forms. The genetic manipulation facilities operated by the Anunnaki represented perhaps the most ethically troubling dimension of their earthly activities, revealing systematic programs for modifying human and animal biology to create organisms with engineered characteristics serving Anunnaki purposes. The sophistication of these facilities and the documented genetic modification procedures indicate that Anunnaki biological sciences had achieved capabilities for deliberate genetic engineering that would not be matched by human biotechnology until the late 20th century development of recombinant DNA techniques. The systematic dismantling of these facilities during the departure removed both the physical equipment and much of the technical knowledge necessary for genetic manipulation, ensuring that subsequent human civilizations would lack capabilities for deliberate genetic modification for thousands of years. The laboratory facilities described in cuneiform texts from Uruk incorporated specialized chambers designed for different stages of genetic research and modification procedures, including observation chambers, where specimens were examined and biological samples collected, processing chambers where genetic material was extracted and prepared for manipulation, modification chambers where genetic alterations were introduced into cells or embryos, and incubation chambers where modified organisms were gestated and monitored through development. The tablet describes how these chambers were constructed with environmental controls that maintained precise temperature and humidity conditions, specialized lighting systems that provided optimal illumination for detailed biological work, and ventilation systems that prevented cross-contamination between different research programs. The specimen collection and storage systems documented in these texts enabled maintenance of extensive biological libraries containing genetic material from humans, animals, and plants that served as resources for genetic research programs. The tablet describes how specimens were catalogued according to sophisticated classification systems that organized materials by species, genetic characteristics, geographical origin, and potential applications. The storage systems incorporated preservation technologies, including chemical fixation that maintained tissue structures, cryogenic storage that prevented degradation of viable cells, and desiccation procedures that preserve seeds and other drought-resistant biological materials. The scale of these specimen collections, which the tablets indicate included samples from thousands of distinct varieties and bloodlines, reveals the comprehensive scope of Anunnaki genetic documentation programs. The genetic extraction and analysis equipment described in the tablets enabled isolation of what the texts term the essence that carries the pattern from parent to offspring, clearly referring to genetic material, though the precise biochemical understanding implied by these descriptions remained somewhat ambiguous. The extraction procedures described involve mechanical disruption of cells to release their contents, chemical treatments that separate genetic material from other cellular components, and purification steps that remove contaminating substances. The analysis procedures described enable determination of genetic characteristics through examination techniques that the tablets describe in terms suggesting visual observation of chromosomal structures and possibly biochemical analysis of genetic composition. The genetic modification procedures documented in these texts describe methods for introducing desired characteristics into organisms through interventions applied at various developmental stages. The tablets describe procedures applied to reproductive cells before fertilization that ensured offspring would carry specific genetic modifications, interventions applied to early embryos during initial cell divisions, when developmental programming was being established, and treatments applied to developing fetuses that influence their physical and cognitive characteristics. The success rates reported for these modification procedures, typically ranging from 30 to 70% depending on the complexity of intended modifications, suggest that Anunnaki genetic technologies achieve substantial reliability, though not perfect control over biological outcomes. The hybrid creation programs documented in the tablets reveal systematic efforts to combine genetic material from different species to create organisms with novel characteristic combinations. These hybridization programs produced what the texts describe as mixed creatures that combined features from different parent organisms, including combinations of human genetic material, with that of various animal species to create beings with enhanced physical capabilities, sensory acuities, or other characteristics deemed useful for specific purposes. The tablet descriptions of these hybrid organisms suggest creations that would be considered biological impossibilities by conventional understanding of reproductive barriers between species, indicating that Anunnaki genetic technologies included capabilities for overcoming natural incompatibilities that prevent interspecies breeding. The ethical implications of these genetic manipulation programs, particularly those involving human subjects, are profoundly disturbing when examined from modern bioethical perspectives. The tablets describe human genetic modification programs conducted without any indication that subjects or their families provided informed consent, or possessed meaningful understanding of the procedures being performed and their implications. The creation of human-animal hybrids raises fundamental questions about the moral status of such beings and the ethical legitimacy of creating sentient organisms specifically designed to serve as tools or servants. The systematic nature of these programs and their documentation alongside agricultural and animal breeding programs suggest that Anunnaki ethical frameworks did not recognize human autonomy and dignity to degrees that modern ethics would consider appropriate. The dismantling procedures for genetic facilities described in the tablets reveal systematic approaches to eliminating both physical equipment and biological specimens that could enable reconstruction of Anunnaki genetic capabilities. The dismantling process included destruction of laboratory equipment through controlled demolition that rendered instruments irreparable, elimination of specimen collections through procedures that ensured complete biological degradation, and purification of facility interiors to remove residual biological materials that might preserve genetic information. The tablets describe how certain genetic documentation was preserved in sealed archives rather than destroyed, suggesting that complete elimination of genetic knowledge was not intended, though access to preserved information would be restricted to prevent premature human acquisition of genetic modification capabilities. Administrative records reveal that selected human administrators and priests had received life extension treatments that dramatically increased their natural lifespans. The departure inventories document removal of these treatment protocols, pharmaceutical compounds, and the technological equipment necessary for their administration, effectively ensuring that human lifespans would revert to normal parameters following the Anunnaki withdrawal. The longevity treatment programs documented in these administrative records provide potential explanation for the extraordinary lifespans attributed to early rulers in the Sumerian king list and similar chronological texts from other ancient civilizations. The treatments described apparently combined genetic modifications applied early in life with ongoing pharmaceutical interventions throughout extended lifespans, together producing dramatic increases in maximum lifespan and maintaining physical and cognitive capabilities well beyond normal human aging trajectories. The systematic removal of longevity technologies during the departure ensured that human lifespans would return to natural parameters, though the genetic modifications already present in certain bloodlines might provide residual longevity benefits that would persist for several generations before being diluted through intermarriage with unmodified populations. The genetic modification procedures applied to enhance longevity focused on cellular mechanisms that normally limit human lifespan, including telomere shortening, that restricts the number of times cells can divide, accumulation of cellular damage from oxidative stress and other sources, and progressive degradation of cellular repair and maintenance systems. The tablet describes how genetic interventions modified telomerase expression to maintain telomere length throughout life, enhanced cellular antioxidant and repair mechanisms that reduce damage accumulation, and optimize metabolic processes to minimize production of damaging byproducts. These genetic modifications were typically applied during early childhood, when developmental programming was still plastic, and modifications could be effectively integrated into the developing organism. The pharmaceutical interventions employed throughout extended lifespans provided ongoing support for cellular function and damage repair that complemented the effects of genetic modifications. The tablet describes pharmaceutical compounds that included antioxidant substances that neutralize damaging free radicals before they could harm cellular components, anti-inflammatory agents that reduce chronic inflammation associated with aging, metabolic modulators that optimized cellular energy production and waste removal, and stem cell stimulators that maintained populations of regenerative cells capable of replacing damaged tissues. The pharmaceutical formulations described incorporated both plant-derived compounds and synthetic substances, with some preparations requiring complex multi-step synthesis procedures that produce molecules unavailable from natural sources. The administration protocols for longevity pharmaceuticals required ongoing treatment throughout extended lifespans, with dosing schedules adjusted based on individual response and changing physiological needs. The tablet describes how longevity treatment recipients received regular medical evaluations that monitored aging biomarkers and physiological function, with pharmaceutical regimens modified based on evaluation results to maintain optimal anti-aging effects. The treatment protocols also included periodic intensive interventions termed renewal procedures that involved concentrated pharmaceutical administration combined with specific dietary and activity regimens designed to restore cellular function and reverse accumulated aging damage. The technological equipment necessary for longevity treatment administration included sophisticated medical devices for evaluating aging status and monitoring treatment effects. The tablet describes instruments that measured what it terms the vitality essence through examination of blood and other biological samples, apparently referring to biomarkers associated with aging and cellular function. Other described equipment includes devices for administering pharmaceutical compounds through what appear to be injection or infusion methods, monitoring instruments that tracked physiological parameters during treatment sessions, and what the text terms renewal chambers, where intensive treatment procedures were conducted under controlled environmental conditions. The renewal chamber description suggests sophisticated medical facilities that provided comprehensive environmental and physiological support during intensive anti-aging treatments. These chambers incorporated temperature and humidity control systems that maintained optimal conditions for cellular regeneration, lighting systems that provided specific wavelengths believed to enhance cellular repair processes, and atmospheric modification systems that adjusted oxygen and other gas concentrations to levels supporting enhanced cellular metabolism. The tablet describes how patients undergoing renewal procedures spent extended periods, ranging from several days to several weeks, in these chambers while receiving concentrated pharmaceutical treatments and undergoing intensive monitoring. The longevity outcomes documented in the tablets indicate that comprehensively treated individuals could achieve lifespans extending to several hundred years, while maintaining physical vigor and cognitive capabilities well beyond normal human aging trajectories. The text describes treated individuals remaining physically active and mentally sharp through ages exceeding 200 years, with some documented cases of individuals surviving to ages approaching 500 years. The tablet notes that longevity treatment effectiveness varied among individuals based on genetic factors, with those carrying optimal genetic backgrounds achieving the greatest lifespan extensions, while those with less favourable genetics experienced more modest, though still substantial lifespan increases. The social and political implications of longevity treatment availability, limited to selected individuals, created substantial inequalities within Anunnaki supervised societies. The tablet describes how access to longevity treatments was restricted to royal families, high-ranking priests, and selected administrators whose extended lifespans served Anunnaki administrative needs by providing continuity in governance and institutional knowledge preservation. The vast majority of the population received no longevity treatments and experienced normal human lifespans, creating societies where ruling elites possessed lifespans an order of magnitude longer than common people they governed. The social tensions created by this disparity apparently contributed to periodic popular unrest that required military suppression. The departure extraction of longevity technologies involved removal of pharmaceutical compounds, destruction or removal of medical equipment, and elimination of detailed treatment protocols from accessible archives. The tablet describes how remaining pharmaceutical stocks were systematically destroyed through controlled incineration that ensured complete molecular degradation. Medical equipment was dismantled and critical components removed for transport or destroyed, and technical documentation describing treatment protocols was either removed or sealed in restricted archives. The genetic modifications already present in treated bloodlines would persist and provide residual longevity benefits for several generations. But without ongoing pharmaceutical support and renewal procedures, even genetically modified individuals would experience progressive return toward normal human lifespan parameters. Perhaps the most mysterious aspect of the departure inventories involves references to technologies that affected human consciousness and perception. Tablet K 12567 describes equipment that could enhance telepathic communication, induce specific mental states, and facilitate what the texts term journey beyond the body. All such equipment was systematically removed or destroyed during the withdrawal process. The consciousness technology systems documented in this tablet represent the most enigmatic dimension of Anunnaki technological capabilities, describing devices that apparently interacted with human neural processes and consciousness in ways that remain incompletely understood, even when described in the technical terminology preserved in ancient texts. The existence of such technologies raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical processes, suggesting that Anunnaki science had developed understanding of mind-body relationships far beyond current neuroscience knowledge. The systematic removal of consciousness technologies during the departure ensured that subsequent human civilizations would lack capabilities for deliberate consciousness modification, leaving naturally occurring altered states of consciousness as the only accessible methods for achieving non-ordinary awareness states. The telepathic enhancement devices described in the tablet apparently amplified natural human capabilities for mind-to-mind communication that the texts indicate existed in latent form within all humans, but typically remained undeveloped and largely unconscious. The tablet describes how these devices employed what it terms resonant stones, that created fields affecting neural activity in ways that enhanced signal transmission and reception between different individuals' minds. The resonant stone descriptions suggest crystalline materials with specific piezoelectric or similar properties that generated oscillating fields when electrically stimulated, with field frequencies and patterns selected to enhance neural synchronization between users. The telepathic communication protocols described in the tablet required multiple individuals to position themselves within the field generated by resonance devices while focusing mental attention on communication intentions. The tablet describes how successful telepathic communication involved achieving mental state synchronization among participants, typically requiring several minutes of focused meditation or other preparatory practices before clear communication channels opened. The information transmission rates achieved through telepathic communication were apparently modest compared to verbal communication, with the tablet describing typical exchanges involving transfer of emotional states, simple concepts, or mental images rather than complex verbal messages. However, the directness of mind-to-mind communication provided certain advantages, including elimination of linguistic barriers, transmission of experiential information difficult to convey through words, and communication across distances where normal sensory channels would be ineffective. The mental state induction equipment described in the tablet enabled deliberate alteration of consciousness states through technologies that influence neural activity patterns without requiring ingestion of psychoactive substances or extensive meditation training. The tablet describes devices termed __137_ that employed combinations of rhythmic sensory stimulation including precisely timed light pulses and acoustic frequencies, and what appear to be electromagnetic or other field effects that entrained neural oscillations to desired frequencies. The mental states achievable through these devices included deep relaxation states useful for stress reduction and healing, heightened awareness states that enhanced sensory perception and cognitive processing, focused concentration, states that enabled sustained attention and enhanced learning, and transcendent states characterized by dissolution of normal ego boundaries and sense of unity with larger reality. The mind-shaping devices described in the tablet incorporated adjustable parameters that allowed customization of induced mental states based on individual needs and intended applications. The adjustment procedures described involve selecting stimulation frequencies, intensity levels, and temporal patterns from ranges that the tablet documents with considerable precision. The tablet indicates that optimal parameters varied among individuals based on factors including age, natural neural oscillation characteristics, and previous experience with consciousness alteration, requiring skilled operators to select appropriate settings for each user. The duration of induced mental states typically range from several minutes to several hours, depending on selected parameters and user responses, with effects generally dissipating within hours after stimulation ceased, though some residual alterations might persist for days. The out-of-body experience facilitation equipment described in the tablet represents perhaps the most mysterious consciousness technology, apparently enabling users to achieve states where conscious awareness could separate from physical body and travel to distant locations or non-physical dimensions. The tablet describes these devices as, quote, 138 that employed unknown principles to facilitate consciousness projection beyond normal physical constraints. The out-of-body experience induction procedures described involve placing users in specialized chambers that isolated them from normal sensory inputs while applying specific stimulation patterns that disrupted normal body consciousness integration. The resulting dissociative states apparently enabled conscious awareness to detach from physical embodiment and explore non-physical dimensions or perceive distant physical locations through mechanisms the texts describe without providing clear explanatory models. The applications of out-of-body technologies described in the tablet include remote viewing capabilities that enable perception of distant locations without physical travel, communication with non-physical entities inhabiting what the texts term underscore, quote, underscore 139, underscore exploration of what appear to be alternate dimensional spaces and acquisition of information through direct consciousness access to what modern terminology might describe as collective unconscious or akashic records. The tablet indicates that out-of-body capabilities required significant training and practice even with technological facilitation, with most users achieving only limited and unreliable results, while a small percentage of individuals with natural aptitude could develop substantial proficiency, enabling extended explorations and reliable information gathering. The safety considerations associated with consciousness technologies receive substantial attention in the tablet, indicating that improper use could produce harmful psychological effects, including persistent dissociative symptoms, destabilization of normal consciousness integration, difficulty returning to normal awareness after induced altered states, and in extreme cases what the texts describe as underscore, quote, underscore 140, underscore that might correspond to severe psychological breakdown or catatonia. The tablet describes extensive safety protocols including careful user screening to identify individuals with psychological vulnerabilities that might increase risk of adverse effects, graduated exposure protocols that built experience with mild alterations before attempting more extreme states, and emergency procedures for terminating sessions if users experience distress or fail to return to normal consciousness as expected. The dismantling procedures for consciousness technologies described in the tablet reveal particularly thorough approaches to ensuring these capabilities would not remain accessible to humans following the Anunnaki departure. The removal process included destruction of all consciousness, alteration devices through methods that rendered them completely irreparable, elimination of crystalline and other specialized components that enabled device function, and comprehensive removal or encryption of technical documentation describing device construction and operating principles. The tablet indicates that consciousness technologies were considered particularly dangerous for premature human access, with concerns that uncontrolled availability could produce widespread psychological instability and enable consciousness capabilities that humans were not yet ethically prepared to manage responsibly. The tablets document elaborate procedures for sealing underground archives that would preserve certain knowledge for potential future retrieval while preventing unauthorized human access. These sealing operations involved not merely physical barriers, but also symbolic encryption, geological modifications that would conceal archive locations, and what appear to be technological security systems that would respond only to specific activation protocols. The archive sealing procedures documented in the departure tablets reveal sophisticated multi-layered security approaches designed to protect preserved knowledge across millennia while enabling eventual access by future humans who achieved appropriate levels of technological and spiritual development. The complexity of these sealing systems indicates that the Anunnaki anticipated their archives might remain undiscovered for thousands of years and designed protection measures that would remain effective across such extended periods despite potential civilizational disruptions, environmental changes, and deliberate intrusion attempts by unauthorized individuals. The successful preservation of the knowledge through these sealed archives would provide future civilizations with access to accumulated wisdom that could dramatically accelerate human development when humanity reached sufficient maturity to use advanced knowledge responsibly. The physical barrier systems employed in archive sealing incorporated multiple defensive layers that would defeat unauthorized entry attempts using tools and techniques available to ancient or medieval civilizations. The tablet describes how archive entrances were sealed using massive stone blocks weighing multiple tons that could not be moved without sophisticated lifting equipment, positioned to create mechanical advantage that made displacement extremely difficult even with available technology. Beyond these outer barriers, interior passages incorporated additional obstacles including narrowed sections that restricted access, sharp turns that prevented use of long levers or other mechanical advantage tools, and what the tablets term, quote, 141, apparently describing stone doors that could be made to slide into locked positions but could not be forced open without destroying surrounding masonry. The symbolic encryption systems layered atop physical barriers employed complex iconographic and linguistic codes that concealed information about archive contents, access procedures, and the significance of preserved materials. The tablet describes how archive entrances and interior chambers were decorated with elaborate relief carvings and inscriptions that appeared to casual observers as purely religious or decorative elements, but actually encoded detailed technical information accessible only to individuals possessing specific decoding keys. These symbolic codes employed multiple layers of meaning with surface interpretations that would satisfy uninitiated observers while concealing deeper technical content that required specialized knowledge to extract. The encoding techniques described include gematria systems that assigned numerical values to written symbols, geometric arrangements that embedded mathematical relationships within decorative patterns, and astronomical references that provided temporal keys indicating when encoded information should be accessed. The linguistic encryption employed in archive documentation combined multiple complementary techniques that ensured texts remained incomprehensible to unauthorized readers, even if physical access to archives was achieved. The tablet describes how sensitive technical documents were written using specialized vocabulary that employed ordinary words with technical meanings established. Through previous training, grammatical structures that embedded additional information beyond obvious sentence meanings, and what appear to be substitution ciphers, where written symbols represented different sounds or concepts than their conventional meanings. The decoding keys necessary for interpreting these encrypted texts were transmitted separately through oral traditions maintained by initiated priesthoods, ensuring that physical archive access alone would not enable knowledge extraction without corresponding possession of interpretive frameworks. The geological concealment measures employed to hide archive locations from future discovery included techniques for disguising excavated chambers and eliminating surface evidence of underground installations. The tablet describes how archive construction involved careful disposal of excavated material through dispersal across wide areas or incorporation into surface structures, making volume calculations that might reveal hidden chambers impossible to perform. The archive entrances were concealed through techniques including construction of full surface structures that appeared to be solid foundations but actually concealed access passages, integration of entrance features into natural geological formations that made them appear to be natural caves or fissures, and in some cases complete burial of access routes with plans for their eventual rediscovery, encoded in preserved texts and monuments located at distant sites. The technological security systems incorporated into archive sealing included devices that would detect unauthorized intrusion attempts and potentially prevent access through active defensive measures. The tablet describes what it terms, quote, 142, apparently referring to passive security devices that required no power source but could detect disturbances through mechanical, chemical, or other means and trigger defensive responses. These defensive mechanisms included structural arrangements that would cause chamber collapse if critical support elements were disturbed, release of toxic substances from sealed containers that would activate if chamber environments were altered, and what the texts describe as, quote, 143, possibly referring to radioactive materials positioned to expose intruders to harmful radiation. The activation protocols that would enable legitimate future access to sealed archives combined multiple authentication factors that together would verify that accessing individuals possessed appropriate qualifications. The tablet describes how successful archive access required possession of specific physical artifacts that functioned as keys, knowledge of linguistic codes that enabled interpretation of access instructions, demonstration of technological capabilities that indicated civilization had achieved minimum development levels, and what the text term quote 144 apparently referring to genetic characteristics that would identify individuals descended from Anunnaki-enhanced bloodlines. The multi-factor nature of these authentication requirements ensured that premature access by insufficiently developed civilizations would be extremely unlikely, while legitimate access by appropriately qualified future humans would be achievable. The archive sealing timeline documented in the tablets reveals that sealing operations occurred in coordinated fashion across multiple sites during the final years preceding the Anunnaki departure. The tablet indicates that sealing began approximately 5 years before the final withdrawal, allowing sufficient time for careful execution of elaborate sealing procedures and verification that security measures functioned as intended. The coordination between different archive sites suggests that sealing operations were directed through central planning that ensured consistency of approaches and comprehensive coverage of knowledge domains that required preservation. Not all Anunnaki knowledge and technology was removed during the departure. The inventories reveal a sophisticated strategy of selective preservation that left certain capabilities accessible to prepared humans, while removing technologies that could be misused or that humanity was not yet ready to handle responsibly. This selective approach suggests that the departure was planned to enable eventual human advancement while preventing premature access to dangerous capabilities. The selective preservation strategy documented in the departure inventories reveals careful categorization of knowledge and technology. According to multiple criteria including inherent danger levels, prerequisite knowledge required for safe use, potential for misuse by insufficiently mature civilizations, and criticality for human survival and continued development. The sophistication of this categorization system and the nuanced decisions about what to preserve versus what to remove indicate that the Anunnaki possessed detailed understanding of human developmental trajectories and the knowledge sequencing that would enable optimal advancement while minimizing risks of civilizational self-destruction. The successful implementation of selective preservation would provide humanity with access to foundational knowledge necessary for rebuilding civilization after catastrophic disruptions, while restricting access to advanced capabilities that could enable devastating weapons or other technologies that immature civilizations might misuse. The knowledge categorization system employed in selective preservation decisions divided information into 5 primary levels based on accessibility and danger considerations. The first level encompassed foundational practical knowledge that would remain fully accessible through multiple transmission channels including temple schools, craft guild training programs, oral traditions, and openly available written texts. This foundational knowledge included basic mathematics and geometry, agricultural techniques for growing conventional crops, construction methods for standard buildings, metallurgy for producing bronze and eventually iron tools, and medical knowledge for treating common injuries and illnesses. The tablet indicates that this foundational knowledge represented the minimum necessary for maintaining civilized society and would be preserved redundantly to ensure survival through potential civilizational collapses. The second level included intermediate knowledge that would be preserved through restricted but accessible channels, including specialized temple schools, mystery school initiations, and hereditary craft knowledge maintained by professional guilds. This intermediate knowledge included advanced mathematics for astronomical calculations and engineering applications, sophisticated agricultural techniques for maximizing crop yields, architectural principles for constructing large and complex buildings, advanced metallurgy for producing specialized alloys, and medical knowledge including surgical procedures and pharmaceutical preparations for serious conditions. The tablet indicates that access to intermediate knowledge would require demonstrated competence in foundational knowledge, plus character evaluation to ensure responsible application, but would not be completely sealed or removed. The third level encompassed advanced knowledge that would be preserved in sealed archives, with restricted access requiring specific qualifications for retrieval. This advanced knowledge included sophisticated astronomical theory and calculation methods, genetic principles and selective breeding techniques, chemical synthesis procedures for producing advanced compounds, precision engineering and manufacturing methods, and comprehensive medical knowledge including life extension treatments with certain limitations. The tablet indicates that sealed archive access would require a combination of technological achievement, indicating civilization had reached appropriate development levels, demonstration of ethical maturity through societal organization and behavior patterns, and in some cases possession of genetic markers indicating descent from authorized bloodlines. The fourth level included dangerous knowledge that would be completely removed from Earth, also heavily encrypted that access would require extraordinary efforts and capabilities far beyond those of primitive or medieval civilizations. This dangerous knowledge included advanced weapon technologies capable of mass destruction, genetic manipulation techniques that could be used to create biological weapons or uncontrolled organisms, consciousness manipulation methods that could enable tyrannical control over populations, and energy generation systems that, if misused, could cause environmental catastrophes. The tablet indicates that this knowledge category would become accessible only when human civilization achieved both the technological sophistication necessary to protect against misuse and the ethical development necessary to recognize and avoid dangerous applications. The fifth level encompassed sacred mysteries that would be preserved only through highly restricted initiatory lineages and would never be documented in physical form accessible through archive discovery. These mysteries apparently included spiritual and consciousness development practices that enabled direct perception of non-physical dimensions, techniques for what the texts describe as, quote, 145 communication methods for contacting the departed Anunnaki or other non-physical intelligences, and what the tablet termed quote, 146 The tablet indicates that preservation of sacred mysteries relied entirely on human transmission, lineages carefully cultivated through the priesthood, appointment processes documented elsewhere in the departure records, the technology preservation decisions documented in the tablets, reveal similar categorization with basic tools and techniques remaining fully accessible, intermediate technologies preserved in sealed archives, and advanced systems either removed completely or so thoroughly dismantled that reconstruction would require capabilities far exceeding ancient human capacities. The tablet provides specific examples including simple bronze tools remaining in common use, architectural knowledge for pyramids and ziggurats sealed in archives but with physical examples remaining visible, advanced astronomical instruments completely removed, and communication devices destroyed beyond any possibility of reconstruction. The pattern of these decisions suggests that the Anunnaki sought to preserve sufficient technological knowledge to enable continued human advancement, while removing capabilities that could enable premature space travel, long-distance communication with other civilizations, or access to energy sources that immature societies might weaponize. The temporal strategy embedded in selective preservation decisions anticipated that human civilization would require approximately 3,000 to 5,000 years to redevelop technological capabilities sufficient to access sealed archives and comprehend preserved advanced knowledge. The tablet describes how this timeline was calculated based on estimates of human intellectual development rates, probable technological advancement trajectories following the departure, and time required for ethical and spiritual maturation sufficient to handle dangerous knowledge responsibly. The calculations apparently incorporated assumptions about periodic civilizational collapses that would set back progress, requiring the timeline to account for multiple cycles of advancement and regression before stable, mature civilization would emerge. Tablet CBS 19847 describes the formal appointment of human custodians who received responsibility for maintaining sealed archives and preserving specific knowledge domains through hereditary priesthoods. These appointments included detailed instructions for knowledge transmission, maintenance procedures for preserved technologies, and protocols for recognizing when humanity had achieved sufficient maturity to access sealed archives. The Human Custodian Appointment Program documented in this tablet reveals systematic efforts to establish institutional frameworks that would preserve knowledge and maintain archive security across millennia following the Anunnaki departure. The selection of custodians involved comprehensive evaluation processes that assessed candidates' intellectual capabilities, ethical character, family backgrounds, and most significantly their genetic heritage to identify individuals carrying optimal combinations of Anunnaki bloodline markers. The formal appointment ceremonies described in the tablets combined practical training in custodial responsibilities with spiritual initiations that created psychological and social bonds between custodians and their sacred duties, helping ensure that knowledge preservation commitments would be maintained across multiple generations of successors. The custodian selection criteria emphasized hereditary characteristics that could be transmitted through biological descent, enabling establishment of custodial families that would maintain responsibilities across extended lineages. The tablet describes how candidate evaluation included detailed genealogical analysis to verify descent from bloodlines that had received Anunnaki genetic enhancements, physical examinations that assessed characteristics associated with divine heritage, cognitive testing that evaluated memory capacity and abstract reasoning capabilities, and character assessments that probed motivations and ethical commitments. The combination of hereditary and personal qualification requirements ensured that custodial positions would remain within families possessing appropriate genetic endowments, while preventing automatic succession by unsuitable individuals who might lack necessary capabilities despite favourable ancestry. The formal appointment ceremonies conducted for accepted custodians incorporated elements designed to create lasting psychological impressions and social recognition that would support custodial functions across their lifetimes. The tablet describes how ceremonies were conducted within the archive chambers that custodians would oversee, providing direct exposure to the knowledge and technologies they would protect. The ceremonial procedures included oaths spoken before assembled witnesses that committed custodians to preserve and protect assigned knowledge domains, instruction in secret procedures for archive maintenance and access control, and conferral of physical symbols of custodial authority, including special garments, distinctive jewellery, and documentation inscribed on precious materials that verified their appointments. The public recognition accorded to appointed custodians provided social status that helped ensure cooperation from broader communities in supporting custodial activities. The knowledge transmission instructions provided to custodians established protocols for passing information to successors that would maintain institutional continuity across generations. The tablet describes how custodians were required to identify and train multiple potential successors, beginning when candidates reached appropriate ages, typically in early adolescence. The training programs extended across years and involved progressive revelation of increasingly sensitive information, with each level requiring demonstration of mastery and commitment before proceeding to deeper knowledge. The multi-candidate approach ensured that even if primary successors failed to survive to maturity or proved unsuitable for full custodial responsibilities, alternative trained successors would be available to maintain continuity. The tablet indicates that final successor selection typically occurred when the current custodian reached advanced age or failing health, allowing for transition period when senior and junior custodians worked together before full authority transferred. The maintenance procedures documented in custodial instructions addressed both physical preservation of archive facilities and technologies, and procedural maintenance of knowledge transmission systems. The physical maintenance protocols specified regular inspection schedules for checking seal integrity, monitoring environmental conditions within sealed chambers, verifying that security systems remained functional, and performing necessary repairs or restoration work. The tablet describes detailed procedures for conducting these maintenance activities, including timing based on astronomical cycles, specific tools and materials required, and documentation requirements that created records of maintenance actions for future reference. The procedural maintenance protocols addressed challenges of knowledge transmission, including methods for preventing degradation of oral traditions, procedures for producing backup copies of written materials, and techniques for verifying that successive generations of custodians maintained authentic understanding rather than accumulated distortions. The recognition protocols for identifying when humanity had achieved sufficient maturity to access sealed archives combined multiple observable indicators that together would signal appropriate developmental levels. The tablet describes how custodians should monitor human civilization for achievement of specific technological capabilities, including development of writing systems beyond basic record-keeping, construction of large-scale architectural monuments demonstrating engineering sophistication, production of advanced metallurgy for creating precision tools, and astronomical knowledge sufficient for calculating eclipse cycles and planetary movements. Beyond technological indicators, the recognition protocols emphasize social and ethical development markers, including establishment of codified legal systems that protected individual rights, development of organized educational institutions that transmitted knowledge beyond practical trades, and evidence of philosophical and spiritual traditions that contemplated human existence beyond material survival. The custodial families established through these appointments maintained their responsibilities across extended lineages that in some cases persisted for over 2,000 years. The tablet references specific custodial lineages, including the guardians of the mathematical archives, who maintained continuous succession through 47 generations at Babylon, the keepers of medical knowledge who preserved surgical techniques and pharmaceutical formulas through 32 generations at Uruk, and the watchers of the celestial wisdom who protected astronomical archives through 53 generations at Nippur. The longevity of these custodial lineages demonstrates remarkable institutional stability that survived numerous political upheavals, foreign conquests, and cultural transformations while maintaining core knowledge preservation functions. The challenges faced by custodial families included not only practical difficulties of archive maintenance and knowledge transmission, but also pressures from political authorities who sought access to sealed knowledge for military or economic advantage, skepticism from populations who questioned the value of maintaining expensive institutions dedicated to preserving ancient mysteries, and internal challenges of motivation maintenance across generations far removed from the original Anunnaki presence that had established the system. The tablet describes how custodial institutions developed adaptive strategies, including integration into religious hierarchies that provided social support and economic resources, development of public educational functions that demonstrated social value while concealing restricted knowledge preservation activities, and creation of impressive public ceremonies that maintained popular respect for custodial roles. The departure inventories include references to materials and equipment that were specifically prepared for potential return scenarios. These provisions suggest that the Anunnaki departure was understood as temporary rather than permanent, with systematic planning for eventual return when Earth conditions or human development warranted renewed intervention. The return contingency provisions documented in these inventories reveal that the Anunnaki conceived their departure as a temporary withdrawal rather than permanent abandonment, anticipating eventual circumstances that would necessitate or enable their return to Earth. The specific preparations made for return scenarios, including pre-positioned supplies, maintained communication monitoring systems, and preserved infrastructure, demonstrate long-term planning horizons extending across millennia. The provisions also reveal assumptions about the conditions that would trigger return, including human achievement of specific developmental milestones, environmental catastrophes requiring external intervention, or completion of predetermined cosmic cycles that scheduled return according to astronomical timelines. The material caches prepared for return scenarios were positioned at multiple locations across Mesopotamia and potentially other regions, containing supplies and equipment that returning Anunnaki would require for re-establishing operations on Earth. The tablet describes how these caches were concealed in underground chambers similar to knowledge archives, but designed for different purposes, including storage of durable materials rather than perishable knowledge, construction for potential millennia-long storage periods, and inclusion of self-contained environmental control systems that would maintain optimal conditions without external power or maintenance. The cache contents documented in the tablets include non-perishable food concentrates that could sustain returning personnel during initial re-establishment periods, preserved seeds and biological materials for reinstating agricultural and genetic programs, durable tools and equipment constructed from corrosion-resistant materials, and what the texts describe as essence stones that apparently stored energy or other resources in stable forms. The communication monitoring systems maintained in operational status despite the general departure included passive listening equipment that would detect any attempts by humans to contact the departed Anunnaki or any communications from other civilizations attempting to contact Earth. The tablet describes how these monitoring systems were designed to function autonomously for extended periods without maintenance, incorporating self-powered operation using geological energy sources, redundant system architectures that would maintain functionality even if individual components failed, and signal processing capabilities that could distinguish meaningful communications from natural noise. The monitoring systems would alert designated Anunnaki observers stationed at remote locations if significant events occurred on Earth warranting investigation or intervention. The infrastructure maintenance programs established before departure included provisions for preserving certain critical facilities in standby condition that would enable rapid reactivation if return became necessary. The tablet describes how selected facilities, including major temple complexes at Babylon, Nippur, and Eridu, were left in states allowing restoration to full functionality within relatively brief timeframes if appropriate resources were applied. The preservation measures employed included sealing of vulnerable components to protect against environmental degradation, regular inspections by human custodians who performed minimal maintenance activities, and documentation of reactivation procedures that would guide restoration efforts. The infrastructure preservation program focused on facilities that would provide greatest utility for return operations, including communication installations for establishing contact with remote Anunnaki locations, power generation systems that could supply energy for technological equipment, and habitation facilities that could support Anunnaki personnel during extended Earth stays. The return trigger conditions documented in the tablets included both human-initiated scenarios and autonomous cosmic timing mechanisms that would automatically activate return procedures when specific conditions occurred. The human-initiated triggers included achievement of technological capabilities that would enable humans to detect or contact the departed Anunnaki, development of dangerous technologies that might threaten Earth's habitability, or enable human expansion beyond Earth that could encounter other Anunnaki installations, and social or environmental catastrophes that exceeded human capabilities for resolution and required external intervention to prevent civilizational collapse. The autonomous triggers included completion of specific astronomical cycles that marked predetermined return times, detection of cosmic threats such as asteroid impacts that would devastate Earth, and achievement of conditions within human genetic development that indicated readiness for renewed direct contact. The graduated return scenarios documented in the tablets distinguished between limited reconnaissance missions that would assess Earth conditions without significant intervention, moderate intervention operations that would provide targeted assistance with specific challenges, and full-scale return that would re-establish comprehensive Anunnaki presence and resume direct civilization management. The tablet describes how return scenario selection would depend on observed conditions with reconnaissance missions, employing minimal personnel and equipment, moderate interventions involving specialized teams with specific expertise, and full return requiring mobilization of substantial resources and personnel. The flexibility of these graduated scenarios indicates recognition that circumstances requiring return might vary substantially and that response scale should match identified needs. The human preparation requirements for successful Anunnaki return receive substantial attention in the tablets, indicating that return scenarios assumed human civilization would need to demonstrate certain capabilities and characteristics before full contact renewal would be appropriate. The tablet describes minimum preparation thresholds, including achievement of basic technological literacy that would enable comprehension of Anunnaki capabilities, development of global communication and coordination systems that would allow efficient interaction with returning Anunnaki, an establishment of ethical and social frameworks that would enable responsible partnership rather than reversion to master-servant relationships. The emphasis on human preparation requirements suggests that return timing would depend substantially on human developmental achievement rather than being predetermined solely by Anunnaki scheduling. Modern archaeological investigations have uncovered physical evidence supporting the textual accounts of systematic resource extraction during the Anunnaki departure. Excavations at major Sumerian sites reveal facilities that show signs of deliberate dismantling, removed components that left precisely shaped voids in masonry, and sealed chambers that once contained equipment or materials that were systematically extracted according to documented procedures. The archaeological evidence for systematic resource extraction during the Anunnaki departure provides independent physical confirmation of the activities documented in cuneiform texts, demonstrating that departure preparations involved actual physical operations rather than merely mythological narratives. The consistency between textual descriptions and physical remains, discovered through modern excavations, strengthens the interpretation that cuneiform departure inventories documented real events, involving sophisticated technologies and materials. The patterns observed in archaeological evidence including systematic removal of specific components, careful sealing of evacuated chambers, and preservation of certain elements while others were extracted all support the conclusion that departure operations followed coordinated plans designed to achieve specific objectives regarding knowledge and technology, preservation and restriction. The excavations at Nippur, conducted by multiple expeditions since the 1880s, have revealed extensive evidence of systematic facility dismantling during the late Sumerian period. The Ekur temple complex shows clear signs of selective component removal, with archaeological features including mounting points for equipment that was subsequently removed, creating precisely shaped voids in floor and wall surfaces, conduits and channels that once contained removed materials, sealed chambers whose contents were systematically extracted before sealing, and modification of architectural elements to eliminate evidence of removed components. The University of Pennsylvania excavations between 1948 and 1952 documented numerous examples of these dismantling signatures, including bronze fittings that had been carefully extracted from stone sockets, leaving empty mounting points with characteristic shapes, ceramic insulators that had been removed from walls where they apparently supported metallic conductors, and underground chambers that contained debris from deliberate equipment destruction rather than natural accumulation. The evidence of removed components that left precisely shaped voids in masonry provides particularly compelling support for technological extraction scenarios. Archaeological investigations at Babylon have identified wall cavities with geometric configurations that match descriptions of removed equipment documented in departure tablets. These cavities show characteristics including smooth interior surfaces indicating they housed objects rather than being natural voids, geometric shapes matching functional equipment rather than decorative elements, and residual materials adhering to cavity walls that provide chemical evidence of former contents. Chemical analysis of residues from these cavities has revealed traces of copper, silver, gold, and exotic materials including platinum group elements, confirming that sophisticated metallic equipment was indeed removed from precisely fitted mounting positions. The sealed chambers discovered at multiple sites show evidence of systematic content extraction, followed by careful sealing designed to preserve chambers in stable condition across extended time periods. The excavations at Eridu uncovered underground chambers that had been completely emptied of contents, then sealed using multiple barrier layers including massive stone blocking, bitumen waterproofing, and ceramic tile facing that together created hermetic seals maintaining constant internal conditions. Archaeological investigation of these sealed chambers revealed they contained only minimal debris consisting primarily of dust, accumulated from air trapped during sealing, and fine particles from minor stone degradation, confirming that contents had been thoroughly removed before sealing operations. The care invested in sealing procedures suggests that emptied chambers might have future utility, requiring preservation of structural integrity rather than being simply abandoned. The evidence of knowledge archive construction and subsequent sealing has been documented at sites including Nippur and Uruk, where excavations revealed underground complexes designed for document storage. These archive chambers incorporated architectural features optimized for preservation, including elevated storage platforms that protected materials from potential water infiltration, ventilation systems that maintained air circulation, and multiple access restrictions that controlled entry. Archaeological investigation revealed that many archive chambers had been methodically emptied with only fragmentary materials remaining, suggesting systematic content extraction rather than looting or natural degradation. The fragments that remained included partial tablets containing text portions matching departure inventory descriptions, confirming that archives had indeed contained the documented materials before their extraction. The timeline evidence for departure-related activities comes from multiple archaeological indicators, including pottery typologies that date terminal occupation phases, architectural modifications that occurred during final activity periods, and stratigraphy showing abandonment layers corresponding to documented departure dates. The excavations at Ur, conducted by Leonard Woolley, revealed occupation sequences showing intensive activity continuing until approximately 1900 BC, followed by abrupt decline in material culture sophistication and population density. The transition between intensive occupation and subsequent decline shows characteristics suggesting organised evacuation rather than gradual abandonment, including minimal valuable materials left in situ, systematic facility closure, and lack of destruction evidence that would indicate conquest or natural disaster. The evidence from regional survey data showing coordinated abandonment across multiple sites provides additional support for organised departure scenarios rather than isolated local events. Archaeological surveys of the Diyala River Valley conducted during the 1930s documented numerous sites showing synchronised abandonment during the early 2nd millennium BC, with abandonment patterns suggesting coordinated withdrawal rather than independent decisions by local populations. The synchronization of abandonment across sites separated by substantial distances indicates centralized coordination, consistent with planned departure operations documented in cuneiform texts. The preservation of certain architectural and technological elements provides evidence for selective preservation strategies documented in departure inventories. Archaeological investigations have identified examples of technologies that were left intact while others were systematically removed, suggesting deliberate selection decisions. The excavations at Uruk revealed sophisticated water management systems that remained substantially complete, including underground conduits, distribution networks, and surface features, while other technological systems showed evidence of component extraction. The selective preservation pattern matches textual descriptions of basic technologies, remaining accessible while advanced systems were removed. The evidence accumulated across these cuneiform tablets, archaeological excavations, and systematic analysis of departure procedures reveals a profound truth about the Anunnaki withdrawal that challenges conventional understanding of ancient history. This was not an abandonment driven by disinterest or failure, but a carefully orchestrated extraction operation that systematically removed resources, technologies, and knowledge according to predetermined plans extending across decades of preparation. The precision and comprehensiveness of documented extraction activities indicate that the Anunnaki possessed extraordinary organizational capabilities and operated according to long-term strategic planning that anticipated circumstances millennia into the future. The systematic nature of resource extraction across multiple domains, including metallic materials, crystalline components, biological specimens, astronomical databases, medical knowledge, and consciousness technologies, demonstrates that the Anunnaki valued diverse forms of resources beyond simple material wealth. The careful preservation of certain knowledge through sealed archives while completely removing other capabilities reveals sophisticated understanding of human developmental trajectories and the knowledge sequencing necessary for eventual advancement while preventing premature access to dangerous technologies. This selective preservation strategy suggests that the departure was intended not to permanently suppress human development, but to guide it along trajectories that would eventually enable humanity to access advanced knowledge when sufficient maturity had been achieved. The appointment of human custodians to maintain sealed archives and the establishment of hereditary priesthoods dedicated to knowledge preservation indicate that the Anunnaki intended their influence to persist beyond their physical departure through institutional structures that would shape human civilization across subsequent millennia. The successful maintenance of these custodial lineages across dozens of generations demonstrates that carefully designed institutional frameworks can preserve knowledge and maintain cultural continuity despite dramatic political and social transformations. The gradual revelation of sealed knowledge to successive human civilizations as they achieved appropriate developmental levels suggests that much of subsequent human technological and intellectual advancement may have been guided by systematic access to preserved Anunnaki knowledge, rather than representing purely independent human discovery. The return contingency provisions documented in departure inventories reveal that the Anunnaki conceived their withdrawal as temporary rather than final, anticipating eventual circumstances that would necessitate or enable their return to Earth. The specific preparations made for return scenarios, including pre-positioned supply caches, maintained monitoring systems, and preserved infrastructure, demonstrate planning horizons extending across thousands of years and suggest confidence that appropriate conditions for return would eventually materialize. Whether such return has occurred during the intervening millennia or remains a future possibility. The documented provisions indicate that the relationship between humanity and the Anunnaki was intended to continue beyond the departure period through mechanisms that might include periodic interventions, ongoing remote monitoring, or eventual full-scale return. For contemporary humanity, understanding the true nature of the Anunnaki departure and the legacy of their systematic resource extraction provides crucial context for interpreting archaeological anomalies. Ancient texts describing divine beings and the mysterious appearance and disappearance of advanced capabilities in prehistoric civilizations. The evidence suggests that human development has occurred within frameworks established by more advanced beings who departed after extracting what they valued most, leaving behind carefully calibrated combinations of accessible knowledge and sealed mysteries that continue to shape human civilization's trajectory. As modern technology enables discovery of sealed archives and decryption of ancient knowledge systems, humanity may be approaching the developmental thresholds that the Anunnaki identified as prerequisites for accessing their most advanced preserved knowledge, potentially enabling a new phase in human civilization's relationship with the departed beings who once walked among us and systematically prepared for their eventual return.